Hey everybody, thank you for joining us for today's leadership seminar sponsored by the American College of Surgeons Women in Surgery Committee. Um, we'll ask you throughout this session, please use the Q&A box to ask questions throughout the day. Each session will have dedicated time for Q&A, and we will have a recording of this seminar that we will share after the meeting with all attendees. I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Susan Porres. She is the chair of the Women in Surgery Committee. Dr. Porres is an associate professor of surgery at Harvard Medical School and the medical director for the Hoffman Breast Center, Mount Auburn Hospital, where she specializes in the management of complex breast cancers. She is also the vice president for Mount Auburn Hospital Medical Staff and the associate co-director of the Arts and Humanities Initiative at Harvard Medical School. She is a past president of the Association of Women and Surgeons. As a fellow of the American College of Surgeons, in addition to serving as chair of the Women in Surgery Committee, Dr. Porres is a member of the Board of Governors and a member of the Intimate Partner Violence Task Force. Thank you, Dr. Porres, for leading and moderating the seminar today.
Thank you so much, Bradley, and thank you to all the wonderful staff at the American College of Surgeons who's helped bring this seminar together today. And thank you to all of our participants on the panels and to everyone joining us today. We're really excited to have you. This is a really special treat for everyone since we haven't been able to have our usual in-person gatherings. The ACS Women in Surgery Committee, or we call it WISC, strives to enable women surgeons of all ages and practice types to develop their individual potential as professionals, promote an environment that fosters inclusion, respect, and success, develop, encourage, and advance women as leaders, and provide a forum and networking opportunity to enhance women's surgical career satisfaction. So today we're honored to welcome Dr. Mary Hahn, who's going to present unique challenges in women facing women surgeons, Dr. Fatima Stanford, who's going to present on diversity and inclusion, the way forward, and Dr. Beth Sutton to present ACS leadership opportunities. Our wonderful vice chair, Barbara Levy. Dr. Levy will be handling questions and discussion points that come in on the chat, along with help from our ACS support staff. So to start our day, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Kate Kraft, who will kick off our session with Dr. Mary Hahn. So thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you, Susan. So welcome, everyone. We are just thrilled to have you all join us today for our leadership seminar. And it is my absolute distinguished pleasure to welcome Dr. Mary Hahn to present our first session, the unique challenges facing women surgeons. Dr. Hahn is the Emil Holman Professor of Surgery and Chair of the Department of Surgery at Stanford University. Dr. Hahn has extensive research in surgical quality improvement and national policy affecting surgical populations. Her work has changed guidelines for non-cardiac surgery in patients with coronary stents and informed policy about national surgical quality measurement. Dr. Hahn serves as a director of the American Board of Surgery and on the board of Stanford Healthcare. She serves on the editorial board of the Annals of Surgery and the Journal of the American College of Surgeons and is the co-editor of the surgical textbook Operative Techniques in Surgery. Dr. Hahn has several additional national leadership roles, including Secretary of the American Surgical Association, District Representative for the Western Surgical Association, Treasurer for the James IV Society, and Chair of the Membership Committee for the Halsted Society. We are so very honored to have Dr. Hahn with us today. Welcome, Dr. Hahn. Thank you.
Dr. Kraft, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And Dr. Porres, thank you so much for including me in this event this morning. Well, thank you. So I thought I would just share a couple of my thoughts and observations as a leader and being a surgeon. And I want to start to say that whenever I get asked to give a talk like this to so many women who have really been true leaders in advancing the field for women, I do feel a little bit like an imposter. And that's while I am a woman, I don't know that this is really something that I have any expertise in, but I can share with you some of my thoughts and things that I've observed over time. But I do think I am informed in terms of before I was chair, I was a division chief for 9 years. I've recruited and mentored many junior faculty, trainees. And I'm also married to a surgeon. My husband's a head and neck surgeon, so I kind of see it from both sides and some of the differences and some of the similarities of how we've experienced our careers. So I'm going to just talk quickly about diversity and inclusion, why I think it's important, and describe the impact of bias. And I think the importance of effective leadership to achieve these goals. And I think this will be helpful as we go into our case studies. So diversity is really, it's not really a single definition, and it can be very complex and multi-dimensional. So we often think of diversity as some of those primary dimensions that are inborn, that shape our basic image of ourselves and influence how we view the world. And the 6 primary dimensions would include age, ethnicity, gender, physical abilities, qualities, race, and sexual orientation. But there are many secondary dimensions that are much more nuanced. They are acquired, they're potentially changeable, and they include, but they aren't limited to, educational status, geographic location, income, marital status, military experience, religious beliefs, work experience, etc. And these also bring incredible diversity of opinions to our workforce. So why is diversity important for success? And the bottom line is, if you want the best talent, you need to consider all talent. And so that's, the number one reason. And having diverse teams, we make better decisions. The 30% rule for board leadership is that 30% of board members should be women, or that when there are 30% women on a board, the board makes better financial fiduciary decisions. Another reason why diversity is important is we are the role models for the next generation. You can't be what you can't see, or it's not as easy to see a path to success. And diversity metrics are definitely not sufficient. They are a start, but not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And I think that's a great quote. I use that a lot of times as both a health services researcher, and I think it definitely applies to diversity as well. So a little bit about me. I was born the 6th of 7 children. And you can see this is, I have a younger brother who was born 6 years later, but I think this is a great picture of how we're all like kind of dressed the same, different things. But despite being a child who was mostly raised in the 70s and parents who had 5 girls and 2 boys, the conversations were exactly the same with the daughters and the sons. And it was, what are you going to be when you grow up? And there was no kind of expectation of things that you could or couldn't be. So I said I wanted to be a nurse. And so and that was probably about this age that I said that. And my sister Judy said, why do you want to be a nurse? Why don't you want to be a doctor? And of course, the only experience, I grew up in a small town. I'd never seen a female doctor. I had never seen a female lawyer for sure. And you didn't see any on TV. And I said, well, girls can't be doctors. So, and she said, yes, I can. So I went and asked my mom, because we didn't have Google at that time. And my mom said, of course, girls can be doctors. So from that age on, at the age of 4, I said, I want to be a doctor. But now if you Google, can girls be doctors? There's still lots of articles out there of like, can we be doctors? Can we be doctors and be parents, mothers, spouses, and kind of have a full and robust life outside of our work. So it's still an ongoing dialogue out there, but I think we're all here to prove that we can. And when you Google the word doctor, we think about AI and implicit bias, and how can there be bias in artificial intelligence, right? How could we influence that? And when you Google doctor, these are the images that come up if you just go to the cartoons, and you can see it's like 90% male, and there are a few women in there. And if you Google nurse, it's essentially 100% female. So there are definitely these gender stereotypes about jobs in healthcare. But this I thought was really interesting. If you Google surgeon, you get a much more, these are just the top hits, it's much more diverse when you Google search. And so I was really happy to see that. I don't know what's going on with these penguin guys here, but, but other than that, I was happy to see that at least there are some women, some minorities, and other ethnicities that showed up on the page. So what about inclusion? So here's a picture of me and my siblings. And this is my brother, Mike. So he was the only boy for quite a long time. And I think one time we had a babysitter and my older sisters dressed him up as a girl. And so that's not inclusion. We don't want to make people not be their authentic self in order to be included. And so here's my brother, Mike, today. So why inclusion is important is because diversity doesn't stick without inclusion. We can have the metrics. We can say, okay, yay, we have 50% female male trainees in our program, so we did it, right? We're done. But like diversity, inclusion is hard to define as a single concept. But without inclusion, diversity efforts will fail. And it may actually lead to a backlash if we don't really create the right culture and environment and the right understanding of what we are trying to do to diversify our workforce. And unlike diversity, inclusion is much more difficult to measure. So what can we do as leaders and future leaders on this call? How can we be inclusive leaders? And the first part of inclusive leadership is making sure that everyone speaks up and is heard. And a lot of tricks for this for women, because oftentimes we'll be in a meeting and we'll say something and nothing really happens. And then a guy will say the exact same thing that we just said, and that will just get kind of amplified. So women can be allies to each other in meetings. If Dr. Pori says something, then I can say, building on what Dr. Pori said, which I think is a really important point, I totally agree that we should do X. Inclusive leaders create a safe environment to propose novel ideas. I mean, we want diversity because we want new, broader, different ideas. We really want to consider the realm of what we could move forward with. They take advice, give actionable feedback, and share credit for success. And this gets back to that picture I showed of my brother about authenticity and why that is important. So a survey of workforce said that 30% of women, Asians, and Blacks say they have to constrain their authentic self to fit into the workplace. And I bet to a person on this call this morning, every woman has at some point kind of held back their authentic self in order to be able to fit in to a surgical workplace. And in the science and tech fields, that's actually valued. Acting like a man, regardless of gender, leads to success and leadership. So networking and visibility is really important. I'm so sad that we're doing this virtually today. So when you see me or the other leaders that you'll see this morning at meetings, come up to us and say, hey, we were at this webinar, thank you, and tell me about you and who you are and what your dreams and ambitions are. But sponsorship is someone in power who elevates their proteges' visibility within the corridors of power. And a sponsor basically puts their reputation on the line for their protege. So when I nominate somebody for a specific role, I'm putting my reputation on the line. I'm saying this person will be great in this job. Having sponsorship is associated with career satisfaction, and lacking a sponsor is associated with dropping out of the field. So it's really important to find those sponsors who are going to look for opportunities for you, use their influence to open up doors for you. And finally, a clear path to success. An inclusive leader realizes that not one path trajectory works for all. And I think we've done a great job about making the House of Surgery much more inclusive in terms of even in training time, taking some time off for being able to be extend or flex training for women who have children or during training. We've recognized many more disciplines of what leads to success in surgery in terms of types of research. And we've removed barriers that block alternatives paths. When people say, well, no, you can't do it that way. It's just because we've never done it that way before doesn't mean we can't do it that way. It's very rare that there's something we can't do. So an inclusive leader is going to help figure out those workarounds and remove those barriers. So diversity is being asked to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. So what are some biases facing female surgeons? If a man is a surgeon, he's a surgeon, right? And a woman and a surgeon is a woman surgeon, a woman chair, a woman leader. And that's often meant as a compliment, but it also is kind of putting you, I mean, sometimes when I hear people say that, I hear sometimes like, oh, she's a woman chair. Oh, she got her chair job because she's a woman, or things like that. And many times it's also as a way to celebrate and say, isn't this great? We have another woman who has become a chair. And so it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. And I hope at some point we are all surgeons. And as being a woman surgeon, and especially for our trainees, we're often confused. And even now for the nurse, the MA, the tech, the assistant, I mean, everybody raise your hand when you've gone into round on your patient and your junior male medical student, the patient looks to for the plan and you're standing right there next to them. So I think there's so many biases and we all have them. So it's often hard for our women surgeons to really be recognized for all that they've accomplished. So recent data, and this gets to a little bit of a sad part, but I think some of these case studies will talk about some of these. Female trainees are more likely to suffer depression during training, less likely to be introduced as doctor by their peers. Referrals will diminish when a female surgeon has a bad outcome. The same is not true for a man. Women earn less than their male peers. They're less likely to advance into leadership, and often leadership is in supportive roles. Women hospitalists and surgeons patients have better outcomes. So despite all those things above, and all this feeds into women feeling like they have to be twice as good to get the respect and advancement. And this is why conferences like these that we're having this morning are really important. We need to break down those first four bullets and minimize them. Whoops, I'm sorry, I went a little bit fast. And then finally, I think the worst thing that women endure to a greater extent than men, and it's not that men are not harassed at all, is sexual or gender-based harassment. And when we think about this, we often think of the this iceberg here of the really egregious ones that are really, these are crimes, assault, coercion. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. And there's many more of these more subtle, less kind of illegal events that happen around bullying, snide remarks, backhanded compliments that we've all kind of experienced along the way. And those little microaggressions can, in the wrong environment, in any environment, aren't tolerable, but especially in environments that are not supportive and inclusive, I think lead to women leaving the field. And this is a survey of gender and harassment in STEM. And you can see that in medicine, I mean, compared to non-STEM science, engineering, and medicine, female students were much more likely, but also male students to report hostility and harassment based on gender. And I'm not sure, I think much of this comes also from patients, at least, work that we've done at Stanford around mistreatment. It's not just from our colleagues and our superiors, it's also from patients. And I think that's why we report more of this in medicine compared to some of the other STEM fields. So a lot of work really needs to be done on this. And then I think, being a women leader, I think this is this article about second generation gender bias, right? And the unfair reputation that women leaders and I always tell people, I feel like as a woman leader, we have to kind of walk in this very kind of much more narrow lane. We have much less, many fewer things kind of at our ability to use as a leader. And so, like we can't be too emotional, if we're too authoritarian, we can be bossy or we can be too nice or things like that. And again, these get to be to some of those backhanded compliments. Fortunately, I think leadership is changing in general toward the traits and skills that women leaders tend to lean on. So it's leadership does not tolerate an authoritarian leader, a dictator, like it used to be. I mean, that used to be the especially leadership and surgery would rely on those skills. So I think the softer skills that women use as leaders are being adopted by our male colleagues, which is great. And so I think it makes it easier to be a more authentic leader as a woman today than it would have been 20 years ago. So, so this is one of my, when I first took over as division chief, I saw this this book, The Girl's Guide to Being a Boss Without Being a Bitch. And I thought, do they write books like this for guys? Like, is there the guy's guide to being a boss without being a dick? And so I kind of Googled around and said, do these exist? And no, you find books like this, How to Work for an Idiot, and it's got the tie in there. And it's just like, we have to, be, this kind of just gets to some of those biases that are out there to how we have to lead. So, and, but anyway, and then I just want to just comment, I think this past year we've witnessed some horrific hate crimes and unnecessary deaths. I mean, just what our society has gone to on top of the pandemic, both the Black Lives Matter, the hate crimes against Asians that have really accelerated because of the pandemic have just been horrific to watch. And so the work that we do is just so important, not in our workplace, but really there's so much work that needs to be done in our society. So how do we eliminate a hostile work environment? As a leader, we just have to have zero tolerance, and we need to make people accountable. We really need to foster this culture of diversity, but even more important, inclusion. Have safe reporting systems, reduce the power imbalance. Training, we train, it's been shown not to be too effective. We've been working this last year in our department on allyship. How do we stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves or don't feel empowered to? I think we need to be transparent when we do actions against harassment or discrimination. We need to try and make those as transparent as we can so people understand our values. And then of course there are legal recourses. So a little bit of positive trends and work undone here. This is a study that a medical student did with me, where we looked around over a decade of what was happening with visiting professorships. So bear with me, this is a busy slide, but the top bar here is the trend and increase in female chairs from 2010 to 2017 in our study. And this is our study cohort, and these are major academic medical centers. We reached out to the top 25 NIH-funded academic medical centers in the United States. And then the red line was the proportion of visiting professors that they invited that were female. So we saw a nice increase from here, just about 6% in 2007 to over 20%. And the interesting thing that we observed in the way that this was done is it wasn't a zero-sum game. It wasn't like men were giving fewer opportunities as we increased the opportunities for women. We actually increased the number of lectureships and opportunities that we gave to people. So I thought this was just a really positive, great outcome for everybody. The sad thing here is that and this blue line here is that there's been no increase in the number of minority speakers as visiting professors. And I think part of that, sadly, is our pipeline and what we really need to do to recruit, mentor, promote Black surgeons in our country. AWS keeps track of this as well, but these are the US women's surgery chairs as of 2021. And what's great is on this next page are the chair emeriti as of 2021. So this page is getting bigger too. And these are women who have served as chairs for a long time and now are going on and serving in different and larger roles in organizations. And then this is the work that really needs to be done. This is in 2000, the number of chairs that were women and the number of chairs that were minorities. And then this is in 2020, the number of chairs that were in women. And this is, the denominators are different. I'm sorry, here's women from 2 to 13.2. And then for African Americans in 2000, 8% of surgical chairs were minorities, and that has actually gone down. So that is a bad trend. So I think when we talk about leadership and allyship and diversity, we've made progress as women in ascending into leadership roles, and now we need to reverse this. And there has not been one Black female surgical chair in the United States yet. So work to be done. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to join you this morning. And I'm really looking forward to the wisdom I will learn from you on our panel sessions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kraft, for your introduction, and to both you and Dr. Zhang for leading our discussions. We're now going to move into a question and answer session, I believe, we're going to transition into the cases. And I'll let Dr. Han, Dr. Kraft, and Dr. Zhang take that forward.
Thank you all for that outstanding talk. That was just really amazing. And these are actually some very challenging case discussions. So when I initially read them, I was like, well, thank goodness we have the expert who just gave the talk to tell us these answers, because these are not easy answers to come by. And so we'll just sort of jump right in and kind of talk about the first scenario, which really looks at a woman surgeon who's a trauma surgeon who basically during an interim chair has been recruited to be a division chief in an academic center and has really done an outstanding job with that, who has made community ties and is recognized as a leader clinically. But then when the actual formal chair gets hired, they decide that they want to remove that person as the division chief. And so they actually interview a colleague of hers, and the colleague is like, oh no, I'm not here to take your job, and I'll help you advocate for you. And yet the chair begins to criticize and try to undermine her authority, and in the attempts of trying to remove her as a division chief. And so I certainly thought that was an incredibly challenging scenario, and I'd love to hear about what the panelists think with respect to how to approach that problem.
I can start. I was particularly struck with this scenario at just how open the chair was with not wanting this particular individual being in her division chief position, and just the breakdown of trust as a result of that, regardless of what the outcome may be, whether she, even if she is able to secure her division chief position, I think there will always be that element of trust loss, and it's challenging to think about how one might regain that over time.
So I wonder, Dr. Han, as you are in that sort of position as a chair, how do you see, let's say you wanted to implement, changes to the direction of a division, and maybe that might have been an impetus for wanting to remove a particular division chief or so. How do you go about sort of communicating that? How would maybe this woman be able to try to understand what the chair's motivations are, and be able to kind of see how to align the sort of visions that they may have that may be different between the chair and the division chief in terms of the future goals for that division?
Yeah, I think leadership changes are can be incredibly powerful for organizations, but they definitely are disruptive. And a new leader may be charged with something to come in and to cause some, to disrupt things and really change the direction that the department is going, or they may have their own vision that may not be in line with where the department has been. So I think this is, I think, tough for this division chief, right? So the question is their vision just not aligned with the new leader, and do they need to think about moving, which is often tough and tougher, I think, for women than it is for men, because we often have a partner who has a career, and those can be incredibly disruptive to move. So I'm thinking from the division chief perspective, that person really needs to think about, how can they align with the new leadership? Are their values shared, or would they not? Would they just feel that that it's not the same values, and they don't want to be in that leadership team? I also think the important thing is to really advocate for yourself. And I have something going on in my department right now where one of my leaders is kind of being undermined by the leader above him, and to move him out of a role. And there's one person above him that makes the decision. And I said, go meet directly with that person. Don't let this intermediary person tell your story. Go tell this person what you've been doing. Try and understand from them what the expectations are, and just being open to getting that feedback and change and meet their expectations. So, and also push back on the narrative that somebody may have told you, because I can tell you one of the great pieces of advice when I became a chair, and I went around and I asked a lot of existing chairs, I said, what were the things you wish you would have known when you took your new chair job? And I wish I'd written them all down because they were fantastic. But one that stuck with me is be wary of the first person who reaches out to help you, because as soon as you take a new leadership role, people are trying to influence you and your opinion and what you think of the landscape when you come in. So I think as leaders, what we really need to do is go in and try and take an objective assessment.
One thing I find very troubling about this case is that it seems that the chair is actively trying to criticize this division chief, and it seems that there's no hope for her to find help beyond that. I was curious to hear, Dr. Hunter, at least at your institution or experiences at other institutions, what options do women in these positions, division chief, have to go outside of the chair in order to call for help?
I think every department, there's a governance structure, and then there are people who are influential leaders. And I think figuring out who might also influence that chair, and if they are an ally, or if you can have them become an ally of yourself and sit down and say, what you're experiencing, what you're afraid of, and how you think it's unfair, then, I think trying to go through some of those not so organizational roles is good. And then there's always the dean's office, there's ombudsmen, there's folks in the dean's office who, whether it's the vice dean for academic affairs that are under the associate dean for diversity, are often good people to reach out to and just help you strategize.
And then within the department itself, as you were mentioning, is it potentially a good idea to then sort of discuss with your other section chiefs in other divisions as to maybe how they can, or what's been successful that the chair wants to keep them in their position, for instance, just to be able to ask for advice and things like that?
Yeah, I think those are all really good strategies. Just leaning on your network, leaning on your colleagues. Often your faculty, if they're happy with you in your role as well, they have a strong voice and influence.
So what are your thoughts on the idea of leaving the positions? You talked a little bit about that and how that was tough. At what point do you think that this individual should strongly consider that, okay, this is not the right position for her, and this is not going to be a supportive environment?
I think those are really tough decisions, but I think if you've exhausted those other paths and try to, so I guess the question is, right, if you are replaced as division chief, are you going to leave? That's one question. And that's a hard position to leave an organization from. It's much better to kind of what I like to say, run to something than to run from something. And that's, I think, what makes it really tough is to, let's just say this new chair wants to go in a different direction and they're going to replace you as division chief. Probably staying in place and finding some other outlet for your talent, kind of rebuilding that and then making a move is a stronger position to move from than to move because you feel like it hasn't been a supportive work environment, because everybody is always going to look at that candidate and say, okay, is it the environment, or is it, is this person just, we all work with people who are going to find fault with everything around them, and are they going to come here and be equally dissatisfied with their career here? So that's unfortunately, I think, what all of us think about as we're recruiting people and we're looking at somebody whose circumstances have changed and are no longer good. Now, sometimes it's really, you can look at it and you can really understand what happened there, and get a great recruit from somebody who is leaving an organization that no longer values them. But so it's tough. I don't think there's an easy answer, but I think if anybody was considering this, you should talk to a bunch of people, reach out to your mentors and your sponsors and get some really solid advice, and then leverage that network if you're going to leave for these people to help you find the right position.
Kate, would you like to go ahead and introduce the second scenario?
Well, I think we have some Q&A.
Oh,
Should we go ahead and
Yeah, I think it'd be great to do some Q&A. I think Barbara's going to help with the questions as well as you, Kate and Elaine. And the other thing I'll add is that, this sounds absolutely drastic, but these things happen all the time. I'm sure Dr. Hahn has seen it, and it can happen even to the chair. If a new dean comes in or a new hospital president, even a chair can be displaced without much warning. So I think these are good things to talk about. I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, the higher up you go, the less stable your job is.
And that wasn't always the case. I mean, used to be people were chair and sort of chair for life. And that is truly no longer the case. You're only as good as the people around you and the current scenario. And I think the disruption of COVID and the global pandemic, we're going to see a lot more disruption. Dr. Hahn has a great question about the statistics and whether they apply to just general surgery, or was that all surgical subspecialties? I know, for example, that OBGYN was not included in your statistics because fortunately we do have some Black women in OBGYN.
Yeah, so thank you so much. So that is chairs of the Department of Surgery, which is, if you've seen one Department of Surgery and who's in and who's out. And it is from the AAMC. So the surgical departments that are associated with a medical school. So the 156 AAMCs. And that's a paper that was published by Paris Butler and Annals of Surgery.
Great. Thank you. There was another question that I think is a great question. And since we've seen that training doesn't really move the needle, what recommendation would you have for beginning to change a culture or to change the environment? Do we need some other mechanism for beginning to move that needle? Because I agree with you. I think that definitely implicit bias training is pretty worthless, but I also think that we need to do something to move this needle. So what would you suggest?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I suspect every organization, especially in this last year, has been going through this, and what can we do to change our world. So we, last summer, and really led by Carla Pugh after the murder of George Floyd, and the unrest and just social unrest that happened after that, put together a cultural competency curriculum. So normally we don't have grand rounds over the summer. We kind of end at resident graduation. We begin again after Labor Day. But we use that slot to go through this cultural competency curriculum. And it was more, and what I really learned is that, we can't rely on our minority colleagues to tell us what it's like for them. I mean, we have to educate ourselves. We can't put that additional burden on them. So one of the first questions that somebody asked, what do you do when somebody says, they don't believe it's harder for a woman or a minority to be a surgeon? I mean, that person actually needs to go educate themselves and be more reflective. So, so the other thing we've done is we have a department M&M once a month where we do a cultural competency morbidity. And it's things like we put a porcine mesh into a devout Muslim patient. And then how do we disclose that? It's about, a nurse complaining that they thought one of our surgeons was providing disparate care to minority patients that on the ward. And how do we receive that information? So, right, we have to be open to having people be concerned about our biases, and then how do we reflect on that and change what we do? So really tough questions that we have brought forward. And I think this month we're doing something around one of our thoracic surgeons, Leah Bacchus, who's a super rock star thoracic surgeon, African-American, and just some of the bias that happens to her in the operating room and how that can impact the safety of patient care. So I think we just are doing the education in a way that is relatable. It's, we do it monthly, we bring forward topics, and then I think the bottom line is we're putting it into promotion applications and for our staff annual reviews of what have they done to foster the culture of diversity and inclusion in our workplace. So that is getting put into that. It's part of my bonus plan. I have metrics from our Vice Dean for Diversity that I fill in every year of what I've done. So I think we just have to put it in every part of our workforce. We have to tie promotion and compensation to it on the positive things. And then I think we do have to have punitive things for people who are systematically undermining creating an inclusive environment.
That was a great answer. I think what I hear you saying is it has to be systemic, that one department or one group can't decide to do this within an institution that hasn't really committed to it. So that the metrics have to be there, the promotion. If you don't hold people's feet to the fire, they revert back to what they've been accustomed to. And I think that's changing culture is incredibly, incredibly difficult thing. Another question that I have, and I have a daughter who's a vascular surgeon. Things that I've experienced, she's experienced now 30 years later. It's not just discrimination from our colleagues, but it's the team. It is that as a woman intern walks onto the floor, the expectation of her male colleague who's an intern is that his orders are fine, but there's a lot of questioning and undermining of our trainees by nursing staff, by others. And so how do we work through the teams to begin to unravel the implicit biases that are there? Because it's one thing to do it at grand rounds and to do it among our colleagues. It's quite another to change the entire culture of our system.
Yeah, that is a great question. And they work for often even really different organizations, right? The nurses, the techs, and everybody works for the hospital versus we work for the School of Medicine. So that makes it even harder. We have kind of grappled with this and thought, what we really need is a she for she campaign, because this is often, women in subordinate roles to women, especially when there's that, a young MD and a more experienced female RN, right? There's just these tensions, and they're part of our society. And I think we just need to keep working on changing that work environment. And it's hard. It's a lot of cultural work. We do a lot of interprofessional simulation type things. We brought our OR teams together to do team step training. And in part, it's just to start breaking down some of these hierarchical structures to say, hey, we are all on the same team. And if we work well together, we all succeed. And most importantly, our patient gets the best outcome.
I really love the she for she, especially when it comes to sexual harassment in the operating room. Certainly my daughter and I have both experienced that as trainees. And having a more senior tech or nurse who sticks up for the trainee and tells the attending that this is unacceptable behavior, I think is a structure that could help us, because trainees are really in a subordinate position where their recommendations, their letters, their grades on things are all dependent on that attending, and being seen not as a team player, being seen as someone who goes in tattletales or just doesn't have a sense of humor. I mean, I've heard, and I'm sure you have too, all of those statements about people who call attention to the harassment.
Yeah, but then we have to make sure we're there for them too, because that, that hierarchy of the, attending surgeon and then the tech or the nurse, we have to empower each other. So I think that she for she goes both ways, right? So if anybody can think of a good way to do that, I am all for it. We've struggled of how to do it, but we've started just, with the OR environment and team training. And then we are doing some work on our medical units as well. Because I think our nurses often, they get the same type of bias discrimination from patients. We had a head and neck patient who couldn't speak, right? They had a trach in, and they wrote on their whiteboard, I don't want that, racial slur Asian nurse taking care of me. So it's there. We all have to support each other. The work we do is hard, and we don't need to be, disqualified for who we are.
Sure. So another question, do you have a quick response? I'm not sure there's a quick one, but for people who don't believe that women and minorities face discrimination, there's a disconnect often. And like you, I'm married to a surgeon. My husband is a cardiothoracic surgeon. And 40 years of marriage later, he's been exposed and has seen things that he never experienced or could never have believed had he not watched it happen to both me and my daughter. So is there an elevator speech? Is there something we can do to enlighten people who've just never experienced those?
Yeah, they've totally experienced them. They probably have done them. They just need to have their eyes opened to what they've said, to what they see around them, because we all see it all the time. And it's just, for so long, we just accepted it of, oh, that's just the way things are, right? So I actually kind of answered that one a little bit in the thing. I said, like, first off, they're just not worth your time, right? But that's kind of not a great answer. But I think we have to educate each other. And I think that's where our cultural competency curriculum is really doing that, because people are bringing real life scenarios like this happen. So Carla Pugh, who many of you know, is a trauma acute care surgeon. We were lucky to recruit her to Stanford. She's in the surgical ICU. And the nurse walks in, and she's standing with her back, looking at the monitor in scrubs, in like a uniform. And the nurse walks in and says, "Are you Stanford?" And so here it is, an attending professor of surgery, and a younger nurse walks in and says, "Are you Stanford?" to her. So they have actually gone back and they have totally recreated that scenario, and just how that one thing and the way that person phrased it made Dr. Pugh feel excluded, and totally unrecognized and devalued. So I think them kind of going through that scenario, what they were both thinking and how they came together to just do an educational thing is just really powerful. So we try and bring those types of scenarios to our cultural M&M, because then I think people are like, oh, I've said things like that. Like I've been in a hurry and just like don't understand how saying something like that to especially a minority member of our team is so devaluing.
Okay, well, these are all awesome questions. I think let's go on to case 2.
Before we go on to case 2, I just had one quick question for Dr. Hahn about the situation you mentioned where a patient was excluding a member of your team, even though they couldn't talk. They wrote it on a board. It made it even more explicit. How do you deal with that in your department? This is something we see all across the country, and it's a terrible situation for you know, doctors or nurses to be put into, where they're being told their services aren't wanted. How do you deal with that as the chair of surgery?
Actually, we have, because many of these happen in the hospital environment, we're really working with our chief of staff and CMO office, and there's been a whole task force on this. And when you walk into our hospital, I'm not sure how I feel about it, but there's a sign that says, we will not tolerate mistreatment and disrespect of our staff and our, physicians. And we will provide your care, but if this happens, we will find another place for you to receive your care. And there is a kind of a response team now that if something like this happens, there's a response team that comes in and will de-escalate the situation, kind of reorient the patient as to what is acceptable, and really would, kind of get the patient through the hospital and then dismiss them from care.
Thank you. And I'll let you all transition to.
All right, wonderful discussion. I'm excited to talk about this next case. So this next case is about Dr. Mary Minton. She is a mid-career African-American surgeon in a community practice. She has 2 young children. Her parents live nearby, but they are aging, and the remainder of her family is out of town. So she's really the person that kind of holds the glue together. Her husband is a busy IT entrepreneur, is often on the road, and so she's at home taking care of her children, as well as taking care of her parents in addition. She works for a large multi-specialty private practice that's been run by a couple of men who have had a pretty thick relationship over the years. She's one of the few women in the practice, and recently went on maternity leave for a 6-week leave without pay, and she was expected to make up her time with missed call upon her return. She's paid less, and in addition, she knows that a lot of the bigger, juicier cases are going to her partners, and so she really wants to build her practice, but her senior partner assumes that she's just too busy with all these other obligations, and so she ends up losing out to others for those cases. So she's really quite distressed and is considering possibly moving. This is another scenario where someone's considering switching to another location. So there's a lot to unpack here, and I'm curious to hear from Dr. Hahn and Dr. Singh too. Just what do you see as the kind of the highest priority problems here in this particular case?
Well, certainly this is a really challenging scenario, because in some ways a private practice doesn't have some of the same abilities to sort of advocate, in the sense that you've got various DEI programs and academics. And so these are things that are actually really looked at institutions. And so it actually does make it fairly challenging that there's not the same kind of understanding of that in a private setting. But certainly, I think one of the things to sort out is maybe from the senior partners, an understanding of what do they what your desires are and expectations are clinically, and what you'd like to accomplish, and having that understood as something that no, actually, if you thought I didn't have time to do it because I'm doing all these other things, that's actually not true. So one is to try to just realign the understanding of sort of what they think you're able to do, because maybe they think they're doing you a favor. They think that you are too busy, and trying to make sure that that's actually aligned, that they understand that that's something you want to do, and sort of advocate for yourself in that perspective. But I'd love to hear Dr. Hahn's thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree. This sounds a little bit like PTSD. I think definitely the hardest part in my career was when my kids were young, and you're starting your career. All those things tend to happen to us at the same time, and I think that's the most stressful time. If you look at the life stressors, right? New job, new career, switching from training to attending is hugely stressful, and then having young kids is really stressful. So. This is tough. And I think, just like Dr. Sang said, if you join a group, you should kind of have, hopefully have a really good idea of, what their support is for you. And hopefully you would join a group that the value that you would bring to the group, to your patient population, to the hospital leadership and things like that. So I think with hospital leadership, just go around your group leaders and just let other people also know that you're interested. Show up for staff meetings, medical staff meetings, things like that. I think 90% of how you can be successful is to actually show up and do the work, right? And then 10% is like influence and sponsorship. You could have all the best sponsors in the world who put you in roles, but if you don't show up and do the work, you're not going to progress either. So those are just some of my recommendations. There's a story exactly like this of one of our trainees who from UAB, who went out and joined a group, a very successful group, kind of in her hometown. It seemed like the dream job, everything. Same thing, started a young family, and she was out of there like in a year and a half. She just realized that this place was not going to support her in her career, and we're going to hold her back. So I think, recognizing early on whether or not it's the right fit for you is also important. I don't know if Dr. Sutton's on, because she has walked this walk, I'm sure, as a community surgeon. If she's on, I would love to hear from her. Maybe she stepped away, but others I know have experienced their thoughts on this too.
So one of the issues that when reading this case, that I thought was really high priority is self-care and well-being. I mean, this particular individual really needs to focus on being able to, I think, ask for help so she can take care of herself. I always, with my trainees, use the oxygen mask analogy. You have to put your own oxygen mask on first, right? To be able to take care of others, particularly your patients. So I see her as taking on a lot of the domestic responsibilities, and that seems to be a very common theme among women surgeons. What are some ways that you can think of that she could help maybe distribute some of that load more evenly?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, it's important to have that discussion with your partner, and people have fluidity in terms of their lives. And so there are times that your job is, is sort of sucking up all of the time that you have, and it gives you less to be with your family. And so, your partner has to be there to support that. And then there are other times that your partner needs that. I live in San Francisco, so when my husband goes to the startups, those startups can be like a surgical residency. in terms of the amount of time and effort that's required. And so it's it's kind of like parenting even is not like an equal type of thing. It's more of a fluid. One person might step in and be doing most of it for a period of time, and then the other person swaps out at a different period of time. But it's about overall, on the whole, being able to do it together and just being flexible as well.
Yeah, I would add to that, but also say outsource. So I have what I call the magic hamper and the magic pantry. Like, I don't know, dirty clothes go in my hamper and somehow they get cleaned and get put back in my drawers and in my closet. And the same for, the kids when they were younger. And same thing with the pantry. I'd open it up and there, or the fridge, there'd always be milk in the fridge. And so I think, finding and paying for really good support, because we don't have to do it all. I mean, that's just insane. And so my husband and I think early on realized that, getting a good housekeeper and childcare support and things like that was definitely cheaper than marriage counseling and divorce. So for those things that neither of you want to do, there's somebody, who will help and do it. So, find really good, reliable people. And my advice, what's worked best for us is we've had some amazing women help us who, their kid, they raised their family. They often had their families young, so they still had lots of energy left, and their kids were either kind of high school or older age, and came and helped us. And we never had a live-in, but they were incredibly reliable, and they knew that you didn't want to come home to a messy house, and they knew that if there wasn't milk in the fridge, that you needed more milk in the fridge and things like that. And part of this was just things that they did, and then all of a sudden we recognized, and we're like, oh my gosh, that's so helpful. And so that, I think, finding that kind of person, I think when we initially kind of, were hiring nannies when our kids were young, you think you want to have somebody who's young, who's got a lot of energy, who will play with your kids, things like that. But I think getting back to Dr. Kraft's point, it's also about self-care. You want somebody who's going to take care of you just as much as take care of your kids. So finding whatever that mix of help is for you, and whatever it is that you feel it's fine to let somebody else take care of that for you. I have friends who have basically someone who pays all their bills. They have their own kind of personal assistant, like they have their office assistant, but they have a household personal assistant who schedules their tennis get-togethers and their dinner clubs for them. I mean, this person has hired this great personal assistant who lives remotely and does all these different things for her, and she just forwards everything to her personal assistant and says, hey, take care of this. So whatever it is that's driving you crazy, if it's finding summer camps for your kids, there is somebody who loves to do those things and would be happy to help offload that from you. So when you are home, you can be present and have fun and enjoy the time and spend the time with your family the way you want to.
What a great answer. And I think it's so very important for us to let go of those things that are not fun to do. Let go of cleaning the bathroom, not my favorite thing to do. And let go of the guilt trip that we have to do it all, that, we're not good mothers if we don't make it to absolutely every single game. I remember asking my kids, you tell me which ones are the really important ones, and I will get there. But getting to every practice, getting to every game is not a critical thing. So we have some really, really good questions. How do you distinguish behavior that might be appropriate because you're junior to disrespectful and behavior that isn't quite right? Elaine, Kate, what do you think?
Yeah, that's challenging. I often find using my peers as a source of information and perspective is really helpful. So if I were in this surgeon's position, I would definitely want to find out what other mid-career surgeons are experiencing to have a point of reference, and then be able to band together to be able to fight what may be inappropriate, because no woman should be an island, for sure. So I think developing that sisterhood and finding out what her other colleagues and peers, even not necessarily within this practice, but other practices around the community, would be helpful.
I think in that particular case scenario, it does appear that it is actually more on the disrespectful side, simply because it's clear that the junior people are actually getting asked to be representing the practice. So I think from that perspective, you can kind of take it as, yes, that they're actually undermining your ability to move forward if you're actually the more senior partner. And certainly it would be helpful to advocate for yourself. And in many ways, as Dr. Hahn said, decide if this is really the right fit for you. In the end, do they actually value you for who you are and what you're able to contribute? And do they understand that you are interested in participating with these things?
And I think be aware of your emotional response to the kinds of behaviors. So, gaslighting happens a lot. We're told, well, you're just being too sensitive and you're not, we're not really disrespecting you. So I think trusting your gut instinct about those behaviors is important, and trusting yourself when something doesn't feel right. It's likely that something isn't quite right. It's hard to stand for yourself, and it's hard when other people attribute to you that I got the same comment. Oh, you're so busy. You don't need to, and patting you on the shoulder. Oh, you're too busy. You don't need to participate in this committee or do that. But others deciding for me what my role would be was a really challenging thing. Dr. Hahn, this is a great question for you. I've noticed that women that have moved into chair positions who were raised in larger families bring some reflexive behaviors that are useful in their role. Could you comment on that?
Well, I guess I don't know how many are from large families. I joke around just more because of my birth order. You learn how to lead from behind, and then I think just my family that I was raised in, that, when you have that many kids, you have to try and treat everybody the same, right? And things like that. So I think those are principles that I bring with me. If, one of my vice chairs is talking about what they're doing and they only mention 3 of the 5 divisions, I'm like, well, don't forget about X and Y, because I know, that they, just have disenfranchised, 2/3 or 1/3 of the department. So I think I'm always thinking, how can I be a leader for everybody in my department? How can I make sure that even though I have certain areas that I personally know more about or more comfortable in, I have to make sure that I'm paying attention to everybody and making sure that all the different needs are met.
I think that's a great perspective. So here's one I think challenging for all of us, and I would really like to hear lots of people chime in on this one. Given the pay gap, how do you learn what the salary ranges are for positions such as division chief or chair of surgery?
So I think I put in there, AAMC has tables and standards. Usually you have to pay for it to buy it, but often your dean's office might have it, and you could go in and you could ask them if they have the tables and look at them. They're often they have them by geographic region. They have them by private universities versus public universities, and so that's a good kind of benchmark. But what that often is base pay, and what is much harder to get your fingers on is what the total compensation is. And so pay is definitely one big important thing. And then there are other things, other potential benefits or perks that people might get. So I talk to friends, if you have a good colleague network, and people are open to sharing what their compensation is, because that's also a good way to get a feel for whether you're getting fairly compensated. And I think the biggest at-risk person is the internal candidate, right? If you get moved up into a role inside your organization, sometimes, you might feel like they're trying to get a bargain, or they don't have to give you as much because you're already there and you you want the job. So that's, I think, where it's really important to advocate for yourself and make sure that you're really getting the same package and, for that role, as well as the same personal compensation as if they were to recruit somebody from the outside.
Elaine or Kate, other thoughts on that?
I was going to say, I think it's really important to have a culture of transparency where you work. I'm very fortunate to have that in my institution, where we have an excellent relationship with our departmental administrator, and we're every possible bonus structure, et cetera, it's very clearly outlined. So there's really no questions regarding salary. I know it's not like that everywhere. So asking where are all the different pieces going into the pay structure, and if there isn't a culture of transparency, why? And that should raise some red flags. Why are things being withheld? So just ask, and you should receive, but if you don't, you have to wonder why.
I mean, I will say that I'm fortunate that since I'm at a public university, everything is actually online. So it's for California, and it's a public university. You can actually look up every single person in your division, and you actually can see what everyone else is making. It doesn't necessarily give the total compensation plan, but it does give you an idea. But then, it is important to sort of, if the AAMC is obviously a great resource for that, and it really helps in terms of even just with hiring new faculty, sort of what the ranges are in the different regions of the country and at different levels that you're hiring into. But then also just kind of talking to your colleagues around the country as well.
I think that's all valuable for academicians, but we have an awful lot of people in private practice. So MGMA has, and again, that you can't get that for free necessarily, but they do publish ranges for different specialties, and that's a place to start. In order to promote transparency, I think asking, what was the last person who was hired into this position? Can I see their contract? Can I see a couple of contracts with redacted names? That's not an unfair question to ask. But also, I think it's really important for career development in an academic setting to pay attention to other aspects of the pay structure, like research support, support staff, lab space, things that are a little bit more difficult to get a handle on, but make a big difference long-term in career support.
Yeah, and I
Dr.
would
Porres?
say,
I'm sorry,
okay.
Dr. Hahn.
I was just going to say, I think the biggest thing that distorts pay, even though we have pay tables and things like that, is the competing offer and retentions. And men are much more likely and much more believable when they go and interview for a job and get a competing offer for retention. I think sometimes when women are much more less likely, I just think we're often much less mobile because of partners or spouses to be taken seriously, that we would really leave and move. People don't think that our husband will move for a job for us, versus people naturally assume if a guy's looking for a job that his wife will move. And so that, I think, is another kind of unfair thing that happens that distorts salaries with the best intentions of trying to keep them even.
I just had one last question before we go to the next case. And one of the things in this case that is troubling is how this surgeon is getting the smaller cases, and how to change that, because that will influence your RVUs, and then that influences your salary. So it's a really vicious cycle. And, Cokie Roberts used to say, well, you can have everything in your life, but at different times. But the problem for us as surgeons, if we don't take on the bigger cases early, people just put you in that pigeonhole. Well, she just does the small things. You can just send her the hernias and the Whipples go to him, as an example. So how do we break that cycle?
So I think there's two things in that case. One is I think her partners are being very paternalistic about, deciding what she wants to do and take on, and what, because of what they perceive as other commitments. And I think the other thing is you just have to go reach out to the referring physicians and say, yes, take some of the small things, but then when you reach out and say, hey, thank you for sending me patient XYZ, I really also like taking care of patients with pancreatic cancer. And, I trained at, Sloan Kettering and feel very, competent and accomplished to do this. And I would love to help take care of some of your patients and work with you together. So I think it just, anybody building a practice, it takes a lot of reaching out for those first referrals and nurturing those referral bases. And then it's dealing with your senior partners when you get that case, and then they're like, wait, why did they send that to you? Is, I think, the other challenge, and how you navigate that.
Thank you. Well, let's go to the third case. Dr. Kraft and Dr. Zhang, you want to introduce that?
Sure. So this is a bit about how to switch and adjust things in the different stages of your career. And so Dr. Kathy McGuire is at an academic institution. She is about 2.5 years out of her cardiothoracic surgery fellowship, and she's focused on thoracic malignancies. She was actually hired to be 100% clinical, and it's a very busy practice where the senior partner is retired basically shortly after she joins. And so she actually has a very heavy clinical load to the point that although she and her husband want to have children, she feels like she doesn't have the time for that. And she's actually interested in having some more research time and having some protected time for research, but her division is fairly small. But even in her limited time, she actually has developed a sort of multidisciplinary group of oncologists and pathologists and radiologists, and is even submitted to grants that are being reviewed, and has some work that's been presented at national and regional meetings, has published a few papers, and is on some national and institutional committees. However, the division chief is out of town quite frequently, and doesn't appear to be very interested in her career development, and basically tells her, oh, you're not ready for promotions, it's still too early, don't worry about it. And so she's quite lost in terms of feeling unsupported, and yet, having these a desire to have a family and a desire to kind of switch roles into research, or at least add research into her portfolio. And so I'd be really interested in hearing your thoughts, Dr. Hahn, on how she could negotiate that path.
And I read this one, I think, Herb Chen gives a great talk, and I think set up a great program at Wisconsin. And then I know took that to UAB about every junior faculty should have a mentorship team. And that mentorship team should include people outside of your division and even outside of your department for exactly these reasons. Things that are working great for the division chief. They're traveling 1 to 2 weeks a month, and that, it seems like everybody is in service of that person being able to do what they want to do, and they're not taking on their responsibility as a division chief and really mentoring and bringing up their more junior colleagues. So I think reaching out to mentors and sponsors, either within the department, outside the division, would be really helpful. Department chair, and again, this is where the dean's office, especially around promotion, can come in and review the file and help advocate for the person as well. And finally, this person sounds like a rock star that some other department would really value. And maybe we talked about fit, and the other thing, and is this somebody whose career is is going to flourish at this place, or, you know, very promising. Is this also a time, especially if they land a grant, where another department many departments would be looking to scoop them up? So again, I think those are kind of the first ways that I would approach this and see how things go.
I had a couple thoughts on the same lines about this case. One is that I think we tend to undersell ourselves, right? We do all these great things behind the scenes, but we're not advertising it. We're not creating our own brand. And so one thing that this Dr. McGuire could do is to really sit down with her division chief and say, listen, this is what I'm doing, X, Y, Z, outline everything and show it, pull out the papers she's published, show the grants she submitted, show the talks that she's been giving, and that she's really creating this regional and national reputation for herself, because division chiefs and department chairs are busy. They don't have their finger on the pulse of every single faculty member. So it's really important to be able to kind of get them up to speed on what's going on. So that was something that really struck me as well. I think another important takeaway from this too is really being familiar with the criteria for promotion. It could be that she is doing absolutely outstandingly, but maybe there are other things that in all reality, the division chief is thinking about that she needs to focus on as well, and just having kind of that outline of what steps she needs to take, what areas she needs to work on that would eventually allow her to then proceed up the promotion ladder along the trajectory that's expected at her institution. I think would be really good advice for her as well.
So one of the questions I had is that, you know, she's clearly, you know, been able to do this and submit grants. And as we all know, it's very challenging to get them. You actually have to keep persisting. You're often going to not get it the first go around, and it needs, you know, multiple times to add more preliminary data and take more time to revise. And so when do you suggest sort of advocating for the change in sort of proportion of time? Because right now she's 100% clinical. So she's clearly doing everything sort of, you know, outside and in addition to what she's already carrying as a clinical burden. Then is it okay to ask for that before, you know, the grant's been reviewed, or would you sort of take your grant revision and then go up there and say, look, I need some resources, you know, some amount of startup funds or some amount of protected time? If that hasn't been negotiated ahead of time, which a lot of times when people are doing research, that is something that they kind of step into the role and have already negotiated. If you're already into this, you know, 2 to 3 years out, how would you approach that?
I think it's tough. I actually have a mentee, you know, cardiothoracic surgery is its own department at Stanford. So one of my mentees is a junior pediatric cardiac surgeon. And he comes to me with this exact problem every time. And he was recruited to be on the research track. But, you know, the easiest metric for your division chief to see of your productivity and the one that's most impactful is to the bottom line is RVUs, right? And often I think for us, it's easier to do another case, to you know, see another patient than to really do the hard work of revising, resubmitting a grant or things like that. So so I think for someone this early on in their career, they really do need to be mentored and really you know, kind of picked up and encouraged to keep doing that work if that's really where their passion is. That's what's going to differentiate them. And you know, it sounds like I agree with you about, you know, sitting down with your division chief. It seemed like in this case scenario, she was having trouble even getting the attention of her division chief long enough to sit down with. But it could be just, you know, intermittent, like, you know, updates like, oh my gosh, I want to share this great news with you. I just got put on X committee. And sometimes that can be threatening to the division chief. So I think it just, I'd need to know more about what the relationship was, when this person recruited this faculty, what role did they recruit them for, and were they really following up in their obligation to really nurture and mentor this career? Maybe they recruited them to be an excellent technical cardiac surgeon who's going to be busy and do a lion's share of the clinical load, because that's what the division needed at the time. And then if this person is wanting to kind of change that and say, listen, this is great and I'm happy to do this, but I also want to do that, can we look at hiring another person to also help with the clinical load? So I think it's really understanding what the person initially was hired to what roles they were hired to fulfill, and then being willing to be flexible and saying, okay, well, this would also be valuable for our division. So how can we spread the work better?
Great questions, great cases. So we have some questions sort of broadly from all of these things that I wanted to make sure that that we got to. So one of the questions was from someone who's new in the workforce and wants to know, does the expectation that working twice as hard for the same pay and the same situation, does it get better?
So I answered, I think it does. I think it does. I think as you kind of build your reputation, if you're in the right environment, I think it does get better. I think we also hold ourselves to a much higher standard as women. I think we tend to not give ourselves a break too. So the first thing I think we all need is some self-compassion, and just to recognize how amazing every person is on this call. I mean, graduates from medical school and surgical training and beyond, how much effort and you've put into getting to where you are today. So I think we first need some self-compassion, because I do think we are tougher on ourselves, and to give ourselves a break. And then I think as we grow in our career and build our practice, I think as your reputation grows, then some of that double standard does diminish. I don't think it ever quite goes away, though.
Dr. Kraft, your thoughts?
About 10 years in, so still getting the hang of it, but I would say that the responsibilities have changed such that it's better, but there's still always, I always tell my trainees, it gets harder in different ways. And what I've noticed is that you have a little bit more ability to delegate, but that's a skill in and of itself, is learning to delegate and learning to say no. So I think trying to figure that out and acquire those skills early on and implement them later in one's career is really important.
Dr. Chang?
I think that actually, I completely agree with Dr. Hahn. I think over time, it definitely, on the clinical side, it's, you do develop your reputation. And so, junior male colleagues, they're still going to come, all of these are going to come to you because you have the experience and the expertise in the clinical arena. I think that you do end up overall in any field, like working harder as time goes on, simply because you become more facile at what you do, and so then you add more to your plate. So I think the saying no part is the hardest, because oftentimes, the opportunities you get as you move up are to do more work, actually. And so, like this year, I said yes to a guidelines committee that I hadn't ever done something like that before. And I was like, oh my God, this is so much more work. And why is it so much harder to write these couple of sentences, and I could spit out a whole grant in much less time. So it's amazing how, and we're always learning. So I think in that perspective, that's just part of the sort of fields that we've chosen and the careers that we've chosen, is that these things are interesting and there's always more to learn and there's always more to explore, and sort of all of that from both the clinical and the scientific discovery. It just ends up being, you do as much as you can and trying to find a balance.
I do think, though, that women are still at risk when we do say no, that we will then be passed over for any other opportunity. So I think that our colleagues often will extrapolate one no to, oh, she's too busy and she's not available. So I think it's important. Yes, we have to be compassionate and we have to understand that we can't be all things to all people at all times. We can't do everything. Picking and choosing those things we really want to do and those things that will enhance our careers and be interesting for us, I think is important. When we do say no, if it's because we're just not interested, that's fine, because then we may be passed over for those things again. If it is because there's a particular scenario that we just can't, I think we have to give a reason often that our colleagues may not have to do, so that we're not passed over the next time. And I find myself, I used to have a big sign over my desk that said, just say no. And I had a rule in my practice that I would sit on an email for at least 24 hours before answering it. Because as a career development move, I learned that I had to say yes to everything, because any one thing I said no to would then snowball into other things. So I think we still face that problem as women surgeons that perhaps some of our colleagues don't.
Yeah, and I suspect it's even harder for minority surgeons because there are so few, and you get asked in so many different ways to represent on many different committees. And I think that burden and that uncompensated work is disproportionately falling on the shoulders. Unfortunately, now we have many more women in surgery, and so another good hack for saying no is say, boy, that's such a great opportunity. I don't feel I have the time to give what it needs, but let me recommend some other really great people, because then you make it easy for them. Just say no, then somebody's like, oh, now I have to go find someone else, and they're frustrated. Versus if you kind of butter them up and tell them like, oh, how flattered and honored you are and how important it is, that you don't think you can give it the effort it deserves. And some people who might be able to, and give them a list of people that they could reach out to. You've kind of made it easier, and you haven't really said no. You've now become like, somebody who is helpful in a different way.
That's a superb answer, and it encourages us to be mentors and sponsors too, to elevate somebody else that the people may not have thought of. There's one more really important question I want to get to before we kind of transition from this session. And that is a question from someone who says, how do you deal with harassment and intimidation by fellow female surgeons? Belittling, undermining, without putting your own career at risk, especially if you're a trainee. And I think that's a really important question for us to kind of grapple with.
Yeah, I think that, that fits into so many, I think challenges and stereotypes, right? First, the queen bee, that there's not enough oxygen at the top for more than one or two women. And so, women may do that, unconsciously or consciously say there's just, I want to be, the it person or whatever. And I think that other bias of like, that people like to, laugh, like the cat fights, like, oh, look at those two women go at each other, or things like that. And there's that kind of very unflattering and unhelpful way of, if two women don't get along or disagree or aren't supportive of each other, it definitely is judged by many different lenses. So what do you do if you are the trainee and you feel like your female mentor, sponsor isn't supportive of you? I mean, that I think is incredibly hurtful. It's more hurtful, right, than to receive that type of lack of support from a male colleague. Because I think, you expect somebody who you see, and maybe you even see as a role model, to see some of themselves in you and to get you better, but it doesn't always happen that way. So I guess the pieces of advice and not knowing the exact circumstances is trying to understand, is that person the right role model for you? Are they the right mentor or sponsor for you? I think to always just keep things on a very professional level. And I think that's one of the toughest things about becoming a leader is you have to give up a lot of, kind of friendships so much, especially with people who work with you and for you, because sometimes we have to make tough decisions, and that it's hard if there's, if the relationship structure isn't clear. So not knowing all the details, I think just reaching out to other people and to recognize many times it's not you, right?
I think that's the really important thing, is not to absorb it and to lose confidence, and having that self-awareness to understand the relationship, I think, is really tough. And I also, for whoever this was who asked the question, reach out to those of us on the panel, those of us who are leaders, and if there is a personal situation, we'll do our best to try to help as well. So I'm going to turn everything back to Dr. Porres. This has been a fantastic session. I want to thank everybody for opening your souls up to answer some of these tough situations. Dr. Porres.
Thank you so much, Dr. Levy. And I just want to thank everyone who's participated. We have had some fantastic discussions here today about these cases. Thank you, Dr. Hahn, for so generously giving of your time today. Thank you, Dr. Kraft and Dr. Zhang for, and to Dr. Levy for moderating the discussion and leading us through this, including all of our questions that come in on the chat. So it's really been terrific. We're now very pleased and honored to welcome Dr. Fatima Stanford, an obesity medicine physician scientist at Mass General Hospital and Harvard Medical School in Boston. Dr. Stanford is an accomplished physician scientist and one of the first fellowship-trained obesity medicine physicians in the world. And she's had many honors over the years, but later this year, she's going to be awarded the American Medical Association Dr. Edmund and Rima Kababi Dedication to the Profession Award, which recognizes a physician who demonstrates active and productive improvement to the profession of medicine through community service, advocacy, leadership, teaching, or philanthropy. She's completed many fellowships and internships with the Discovery Channel, the Harvard Center for Public Leadership, the CDC, the American Cancer Society. In addition, Dr. Stanford has been recognized by her leadership and diversity work within the medical field and community. We are honored to have Dr. Stanford with us today to prevent diversity and inclusion, the way forward. Welcome, Dr. Stanford.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Porres. It's a delight to be here, and I'm very much looking forward to this presentation today. For those who've heard me speak and actually just did a wonderful talk with Dr. Hahn and group at Stanford, which is my namesake, wanted to be there in person, but this pandemic has other thoughts. So I'm thankful to have this opportunity. So as Dr. Porres mentioned, I'm Dr. Fatima Cody Stanford, and it's a delight to present to you today at the American College of Surgeons. I think you'll learn quite a bit about me during the course of this talk. And I have entitled this Diversity and Inclusion, Our Past and a Way Forward. But I think it's important for us to really delve into our knowledge and understanding, particularly of women with intersectional identities. I've been paying attention to the course this morning, and I've seen some really important questions being raised by my colleagues of color, those that are from the LGBTQ community, those women that have intersectional identities. And unfortunately, in the work that we do in gender equity in medicine, we often forget women that look like me. And so I'm hoping that through this presentation, we'll glean some of the understanding about what the path is like for women like me coming through this path and what we can really think about as we move forward. And so I look forward to your questions. I do have a few disclosures. They will not conflict with anything that I present today, but did want to disclose those at the outset of this presentation. So today we're going to discuss a few things. We're going to describe obstacles associated with progress and advancement in academia across the life course. We're going to explore the role of race and ethnicity and gender in medicine and science, getting back to that intersectional identity that I talked to you about just a few moments ago. And we'll discuss strategies to navigate some of this disequilibrium that we encounter in academic life, particularly as Black women in the field. But I'm going to take you back to my beginning of life. And this is really my earliest memory in life. This was 5 months of age. This was the day of my christening. You might be saying, well, there's no way, Dr. Stanford, that you remember this, but this is indeed my first memory. I was at my maternal grandmother's home, and I remember my mom and my maternal grandmother trying to position me for this picture. And I remember thinking in my brain, I wish they just kind of get this together already so we could take this picture. So I remember this from an outward looking view, much like I'm looking at you today. And so, I was, bright-eyed, really excited about kind of engaging in this world. And this is my maternal grandmother, who I credit with who I'm here today. But I want you to see the transition. So this very excited, happy, I was an infant, over to this really serious look, which became a lot of my demeanor. My maternal grandmother still pretty excited about things and, happy to be hanging out with her granddaughter. But I'll explain why this transition in this facial expression occurred. It was because as a young Black girl, I had to become privy to what it was like to be a young Black girl. Now, here you see me in this picture. I'm going to point out where I was. This is in the early 80s. I was 4 years old at the time. My class, if you look really closely, other young Black girls and boys at my private school in Atlanta, Georgia, where I was born and raised. Here on the right, my sister, who is, my baby sister is now 40, so it gives you some idea of kind of where I am in terms of my age progression. But, we had a very warm and supportive environment. But despite this, what I was exposed to as a very young child was this. At the age of 3, I woke up and I saw this cross burning on my lawn in Atlanta, Georgia, but I didn't understand why a cross would be burning on my lawn. I told you my first memory in life was my christening. The cross was supposed to represent something positive, something full of grace. And so my parents had to explain to me why there was a cross burning on my lawn, why the Klan decided as a Black family in the community that they would show that we were not welcome there. And so one of the key things I want to think about as you think about your interactions with your junior faculty, these young Black girls that are now Black women, or those with intersectional identities, and what the path has been like for them as they've navigated their path through medicine. But their path for medicine began early in life. And so the question that I pose in this initial slide is, how do the parents of young Black and brown girls prepare them for the world that they now inherit? And I focus on girls. We're talking to the women section, so I want us to focus on this, but this issue is germane. And sometimes I often hear in the work that I do in equity as the equity director here at MGH, and also my anti-racism work in our neuroendocrine unit, well, I don't want to expose my child to that, it's a little too early. I think that my parents might have said that it was a bit early for me to get exposed to a cross burning in my front lawn, but it wasn't something that I had the luxury of having an age by which I could get exposed later, because I'm a Black girl being raised in the United States. And this is unfortunate that this is the reality. And I think that we see during this current time where I call a modern day lynching with every single day, because we have smartphones now. We didn't have those in the late 70s and early 80s. We are capturing on camera what has been going on so long. The policing of Blacks here in this country, a higher risk of dying from that at my age than from chronic disease. I went on to, be a prominent person just kind of coming throughout my life. I want to take you back to middle school. This is me in middle school. I want you to see this lovely Confederate flag behind me in the lovely great state of Georgia, where I was born and raised. This was the backdrop of a lot of the work I was doing. I was delivering a speech to the 8th grade class. It's called Black Youth on Trial, believe it or not, back there in the late 80s, early 90s. But still went on to do things that brought me joy. I was a cheerleader. I somehow sat in that split for an hour. I don't think I could do that these days. But it was a reflection of me trying to bring together my varied interest and background. My exposure to clinical research happened pretty early in life. I went to a high school, it was called the Academy of Math and Science at Benjamin Elijah Mays High School in the Atlanta public school system, and thankfully received my first grant from the NIH while I was transitioning from my 10th to 11th grade year. And I began to conduct research, which then took me to compete and represent the United States in the International Science and Engineering Fair in my work in biochemistry at the time. I was very excited about having these opportunities, but recognized that I even had privilege that those that were coming from backgrounds that were middle class backgrounds in Atlanta didn't have experience or didn't have the exposure to. I went on to do very well in high school. I was named to the USA Today All High School Academic Team. I was named one of the top high school students from Ebony Magazine that year, and went on to be valedictorian of my high school class. Received $2.1 million in college scholarship offers. My goal was $1 million. I'm glad that I was able to, I guess, surpass that goal. And a lot of this was about, making sure that I set myself up in such a way, knowing that education could bring about some equilibrium. It could bring about some progress, but always being second guessed along the way, especially as I navigated past this point in my career, past that supportive environment that was predominantly Black within the Atlanta public school system, to my time at Emory. I did my first 2 of now what will be 5 degrees, which I will finish my 5th degree on May 11th of this year. But this was where I spent my early days at Emory. And I was really excited to be here because this is where I'd done my biochemistry research, where I'd started really my quest of really being an academician, someone who was dedicated to evidence and leading our way. But I can tell you that when I started school here, I was met by a young white woman who said to me in our class, it was interdisciplinary studies, I remember it like it was yesterday, that she wished that when she was applying to Emory, that she could have checked the box that she was a Black woman, because she was pretty certain that that would improve her chances of getting a scholarship. Quickly, I replied to her, I have no idea what your SAT score was or what your GPA was, but I can assure you that mine was better than yours. So this implication that as Black women, particularly, that if we are in this space, that we must have been given, quote unquote, a handout to be here. The question the question I want to posit is that if white women have to work 2 times as hard, you can imagine it really is something that we have to work 10 times as hard. My current CV is 130 pages in length. I've published over 110 peer-reviewed articles, yet I'm still an assistant professor here at my beloved Harvard Medical School. So is it really a level playing field? Why have there only been 6 Black women in the history of Harvard Medical School? 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to ever make it to full professor. Our school was founded in the 1700s. Are we really not capable? Is that really so few of us that we could not make it? Just something to think about. I went on to pledge Delta Sigma Theta sorority, incorporated one of the historically Black sororities 23 years ago today, actually, and was surrounded by several key leaders, including none other than Dr. Janetta Cole, who was the first Black woman to be president of Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, who was a professor of anthropology at the time, which is where I spent my time as an anthropology and human biology major in the school. I went on to become the first Black vice president of the student body and the first Black president of the sorority council for Emory at the time, really setting up the way for those to come behind me. And then I went on to do my master's in public health and health policy and management. And this day was a very significant day right after I completed that degree. This is with my Congressman John Lewis, back in 2001, so 20 years ago, almost, next month it'll be about 20 years ago exactly. John Lewis was a mentor of mine, someone who really guided me, and he was extremely happy to be able to bestow upon me the Gold Congressional Award in 2001, the nation's highest award honor to youth. And he said to me something really important right around this time when he gave me this award. He said to me, Fatima, never stop fighting injustice. And I promised him that I would never stop fighting injustice. And I'm so happy to have the platform to speak to you today as I continue to honor my commitment to John, especially as we lost him last year. So I went on to medical school. It was exciting. Finally, this idea to get to medical school was at the age of 3 that I decided I wanted to become a physician. So you can see me here speaking to our class on the white coat ceremony day. I have very toned arms. I think that they're still there. What do you guys think? I think they're still there. This is me here. It's not hard to find me amongst my classmates and my family, who's been strongly supportive. My husband here, my dad, my mom. I was gonna call my sister. This is my sister. And I was very excited. This was a great time to begin able to start medical school. I think we all remember how exciting that time was. Really eager about what's to come, like what's going to happen. And I can tell you that pretty early on, after I was elected, I got a call from the historian of the university. It was a woman who was one of the first woman graduates from the Medical College of Georgia. And she says to me, Fatima, I'm so excited you were elected class president. You're the first Black person, not just woman, to ever be elected. You know, our school was founded back in 1828. I'm so excited. I'd love for you to come take a tour of the archives of our school. I thought I'd take, this lovely lady up on her offer. She's one of the first women graduates. She wants to take me on a tour. It's kind of taking me under her wing. I thought this was definitely a great opportunity. And so I began to take that tour. And so as she took me through the archives of the university, she showed me quite a few pictures that looks like this one that you see right here. And I want you to kind of look at that picture and focus and see if there's anything that stands out to you. This was around 1828, 1829. It's the antebellum South in Georgia. And so what really struck me as someone who knew the history was that there was this Black gentleman that was in all of the pictures. And so I asked her, which I think was exactly what she wanted me to do, well, who's this guy? This is like the middle of slavery in Georgia. She said, Fatima, I'm so glad you asked. This is a gentleman by the name of Grandison Harrison. He was a slave who was purchased by the Anatomy and Physiology Department, and his sole role was to rob Black grave sites, much like this one that you see to your right, for the role of gathering bodies by which the white students, shown here with the faculty, could learn anatomy and physiology. Eventually, his wife and his son were purchased by the department, and he actually ended up outliving the 7 individuals that purchased him, and by virtue of that became a free man. But this was something that I was appalled by, but not shocked. I was in Georgia. I knew what it was like. I'd been born and raised in Georgia. And while I grew up in Atlanta, one of the bedrocks of the civil rights movement, I knew that as soon as I moved over to the Medical College of Georgia in Augusta, Georgia, that things were different. I asked the historian at that time, had anyone ever acknowledged this gentleman, Grandison Harrison, and his contributions to the early education of the medical students? And she said, no one has. I want us to think back to that first year of med school, and we will remember that one of the key events that we did as a first year medical class was none other than the cadaver memorial ceremony. It's where we pay tribute to those that donated their bodies, by which we learned anatomy and physiology. And for many of you women surgeons, probably one of the key things that really intrigued you to pursue your surgical fills, that initial introduction to anatomy. So I thought I'd bring this up to the class officers. There were a total of 18 of us, 17 additional class officers other than myself as president of the class. And when I brought this up to my classmates, they really had significant disdain that I would want to recognize this gentleman for his contributions. I got comments like, why would you want to bring up our dirty laundry, Fatima? This is not the right time. And I said, well, if the cadaver memorial ceremony is not the right time, when is? Well, I just don't think we should do that. I took my executive privilege to actually make sure that this gentleman was acknowledged at the cadaver memorial ceremony, which happened in the spring of our first year of medical school. When this discussion, however, arose, I was faced with significant resistance in my class. From that day on, from the first day that I brought this up to my class, I had things thrown at me in class every single day that I was in class. In addition to that, an anonymous newsletter was published that talked about the beloved class president of the first year class, i.e. me. This went out to the entire faculty, to the entire student body, and to a large majority of our alumni. In this particular newsletter, they commented on the width of my ass, the contrast of my teeth to my skin color, things of this sort that were extremely belittling and degrading that went out to all of those that were at the school at the time and to a large majority of our alumni. Instead of getting any guess, negative consequences as people, as we recognize who potentially were contributors to this, we kind of got a pat on the back. Oh, you shouldn't say these negative things. This is pre-social media that we're having these things happen, but this is my introduction to my time in medicine. So not only are we facing being a medical student, trying to learn the material and trying to navigate what it's like to be in the medical school. These are the things, having things thrown at you, having newsletters published that are going out to entire listservs. That was my introduction. Despite this, and this is where Dr. Porys and I met, although she doesn't remember, I decided to found the second statewide chapter of the Association of Women Surgeons for the state of Georgia. I was a med student. They were like, well, you can't really do that as a med student. You need to have some faculty. And so I pulled along some of my mentors at the time, Dr. Christine Gorin, who's now at Hopkins, Dr. Gina Adrales, to help me as I went to go and found the second statewide chapter of the Association of Women Surgeons after the first chapter was founded by Dr. Hilary Sanfey and Virginia. So I went on to do that and continued with research. I was dedicated to being an orthopedist. A lot of my research at the time was looking at navigated ACL reconstruction, looking at things of that sort, and went on to win all of the national awards in this domain. Also served as the student representative to none other than ACS, in addition to my roles in AWS. And this was really kind of a really major thing for me, my desire to be an orthopedist. And then as graduation came around and match day happened, I didn't match in orthopedics. And it was indeed my department chair at the Medical College of Georgia in orthopedics at the time was that, Fatima, if we're choosing between you, who's a great candidate, or the person that the dad who's I played golf with, his son for 20 years, I'm going to have to go with that. You understand that, right? That was one person. One chair from another school stated to me, Fatima, our top 5, we've already ranked and you're number 6. We take 5. I just want to let you know you're number 6. I received that phone call. So I went unmatched this year, but despite that, published my first textbook, actually led an entire series from McGraw-Hill. This book that you see here, the Deja Review series, went on to be a top student, received the Ruth Jackson Orthopedic Society Award, the J.R. Gladden Orthopedic Society Award. Despite that, went unmatched. You can't really tell it on my face here because I was going to try something unique and different. And it was at that time that I pursued a 1-year orthopedic surgery sports medicine fellowship where I did research at the Hospital for Special Surgery and operated out of Staten Island. And so that was this work that I was doing here. And so after all of that and all the awards and things like that, match day came around again. I went unmatched yet again. So you can imagine what this felt like. Now, what I think I can say about the women surgeons that are here, all of you called me, not all of you specifically, but like, Fatima, come over to general surgery. You don't want to do orthopedics anyway. So I really want to thank all of my colleagues that actually called me personally from many institutions around the country, actually after the first match day. And then the second, I was like, I don't want to do general surgery. And so after I didn't match a second time, I was like, okay, what am I going to do with my life, right? Like I've had so many challenges, yet I've done, performed well, won all these awards. What am I going to do? And I, didn't know. So I chose what I think is called the ultimate undecided specialty, med peds, because you can go into medicine, you can go into peds, you can specialize in one, you can specialize in another. That's really how my career actually made it into its work in med peds. This is me in residency. Fitness is a huge thing. I've already worked out for the day, but a huge thing. And I was continuing with my research. And during my internal medicine pediatrics residency, I remember meeting with my pediatrics chief, and he says to me, Fatima, I'm really worried about you. And I thought this was puzzling because I couldn't think of anything that I had done that would cause worry. And his comment or response to me was like, well, Fatima, I've never seen anyone do as many things as you're doing. You're doing 2 residencies, you're doing all this research, you're doing all these leadership roles. I'm just worried you're going to have a nervous breakdown. I said, well, was there anything that I did particularly to, was there like a problem with my performance on anything? Well, no, there's no issues. I just have never seen it done. I said, well, you've never met me. So I think the key thing is letting people be their best self, right? Like you don't know, we're all so different. We all handle challenges differently. For me, I learned pretty early on in medical school that when I'm doing very little, actually, I tried this experiment on myself as a second year med student. The very first week of second year of med school, I said, Fatima, we're just going to focus. We're just going to study. We're not going to do anything else, not all those organizations and research and everything. That first test of my second year of med school, my worst performing exam to date. And so I said, okay, well, that doesn't work well for me. Let me pile everything back on, and my grades went right back up. So there are different ways in which we operate. Some of us need several things going on, several fires going on simultaneously. And that's despite the significant racism that I was experiencing every single day in medical school. I went on to win several awards. This is me receiving the AMA Paul Ambrose Award. Paul Ambrose unfortunately died during 9/11. He was a public health servant. Did my work at the Discovery Channel, oversaw several shows, mostly on lung cancer, non-small cell, for example. And my interest in orthopedics, while you see it displayed here as I gave grand rounds in residency, really kind of dated back to my work in public health, where I was looking at overweight and obesity within the Black community here in Atlanta and faith-based communities and the women's, infants, and children population. So, but there was no such thing as really like obesity medicine. So when I began to really explore, I actually was on call in the PICU one night, and I think it's a second year resident. And I Googled obesity and medicine, and the fellowship here at Mass General and at Harvard popped up. And I called my husband, I remember it was 2:30 in the morning. And I said to him, I said, I think there's this fellowship in obesity medicine. He's like, what does that mean? I was like, I don't know. He says, I think you should figure that out. I did figure that out and came up to Boston to do my 3-year obesity medicine fellowship. And during the time, continued my leadership in the American Medical Association, the American College of Physicians. Here's me speaking right before the AMA made its pivotal vote to acknowledge obesity as a chronic disease in 2013. I was only a first-year fellow at the time. And have continued this work. Actually, as soon as I sign off with you guys, we'll sign on to my meeting with the Minority Affairs section with the AMA, where I serve as the current chair. Despite this, I wanted to continue my work, knowing that a lot of what we do in medicine is really governed by what happens in the government itself. So went on to the Harvard Kennedy School of Government as a mid-career, completed my mid-career degree. You see my family displayed prominently, my best friend, who's actually an architect. So we had varied interest within that setting. David Gergen, if you guys watch CNN, the advisor to, I think, 5 different presidents, but he was one of the people that was influential during my time at the Kennedy School as a Zuckerman Fellow. I want to talk about, though, what happens when you're a physician scientist and when you're Black and you apply for things like K-23s, of 3 of which were denied for me. You get back summary statements that have things that are grossly inaccurate, like this. This was one of my K-23 proposals. You see, it's a proposal from Dr. Stanford. It's Stanford. Dr. Hahn, you guys know how to pronounce or spell the name of your school. It says that I'm board certified in obesity medicine. Like, it doesn't really exist, but definitively I am, so maybe not so much. But I'm African American, which didn't have anything to do with my proposal, which was on bariatric surgery within adolescents. It says that I had 4 publications related to obesity. At this time of this application, I had 60, but I guess there was only 4. 12 first author papers, but they couldn't find them. I'm the only Fatima Cody Stanford in all of PubMed, so it's really not hard to find me, and you just weren't looking. At the time that I was even here, going from instructor to assistant, I had to change divisions. I changed from gastroenterology to neuroendocrine. For those of you who know Dr. Ann Koldansky, who is now the head of the National Brigham, which was named Partners Healthcare, she said to me, Fatima, why have you not been promoted? And I was like, well, you know, they told me I needed 20 publications, so I got 20, and then they told me I needed 40, so I got 40, and now they want me to get 60, so I'll get 60. She's like, Fatima, that's ridiculous. You should have been promoted. So she brought me over to neuroendocrine, you know, and within 1 week put me up for promotion. I mean, it took a year to get through on both medicine and peds, but it shows you how when people are in your corner, it definitely helps. And so I thank Ann for bringing me out of a situation that was challenging. Despite these challenges, you can't see that when you look at the 130-page CV that is mine or the awards that I'm thankful to have received. This is me receiving the Suffolk District Community Clinician of the Year, the youngest person by over 25 years to receive this award. Suffolk is our district here in the Boston area, where all the Harvard hospitals are basically contained. And my mentorship for those that look like me has really been pervasive and continued part of my mission, because I recognize the challenges that I have had along the way. And my goal is to make it easier for those coming behind me. I don't want them to face the challenges. I know that they still will, but if I can make it just a bit easier than what I had to deal with, I have done my job. So, because I know we have to conclude, I do think that various obstacles associated with being a member that's underrepresented in academia, that's what that URIA stands for, particularly in academics. We know that only 2% of all of the medical schools in the country have Black faculty. And once we get into surgery, we can imagine that that narrows quite a bit. There should be concerted efforts to improve all facets of academic life for those of us that are underrepresented in academia, particularly from racial and ethnic minority backgrounds. Strategies to address structural racism should be developed to allow for optimal academic success and productivity for sustainable change for faculty. And some of the work that I'm doing right now in our equity work here in endocrine really speaks to how do we ingrain this within the culture, ingrain it within the work. So I've had the annual career conference form changed for all of those, whether you're an endowed professor of medicine here at Harvard or not. You are required to document what you're doing with regards to anti-racism initiatives at your annual career conference based upon what we're doing every 4 months, or are requiring basically for every 4 months. Much like we think publications are important, talks like this are important, we are stating anti-racism efforts are also indeed important and have ingrained that now within the work. I want to thank you for your time. I know we have limited time. I know that we have some time open for some questions and discussions, but I want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to share with you today, to explain the disequilibrium that many of us encounter that you don't see, and to explain that I want you to really kind of think about how you can make an effort to really help those of us that live in the skin that I live in. And I want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stanford, for that incredible presentation. I think we all learned an amazing amount. And I'm always so impressed with you as a speaker. You're just sparkle. But we do want to continue the conversation. We have some people from our committee to help lead the discussion. I want to introduce Dr. Mio Catano and Dr. Tamara Watts. So Dr. Catano is a surgical oncologist at the University of Texas Health San Antonio. She's the diversity ambassador for the Department of Surgery and comes from a multicultural background. She's passionate about promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the field of surgery and in her community. She's a fellow of the American College of Surgeons. She's a member of our Women in Surgery Committee and also the Young Fellows Association liaison to the Committee on Diversity Issues. And Dr. Tamara Watts is an associate professor of otolaryngology and the medical director of quality improvement and patient safety for the Department of Head and Neck Surgery and Communication Sciences at Duke University. And Dr. Watts is a fellow of the American College of Surgeons and a member of the Women in Surgery Committee. So I'll ask you to take it away.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Stanford. What an inspiring presentation. And it really, thank you so much for being a role model for other people of color and underrepresented minorities. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I would like to lead some of the questions, but before I go ahead, I have a question for Dr. Stanford. So this movement, the DEI movement, is becoming very prominent in a lot of the institutions, including my institution at UT Health San Antonio. But how do you encourage other institutions that have not taken up on this movement? How do you start from the administrators or the department chair, or where would you tell them to start implementing this kind of a movement?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Catano. I do applaud, what I see as at least outward shows of really addressing diversity, equity, inclusion at the institutions that have embraced at least the notion of this. So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on our institutions that are, starting to engage in the work, and those that have yet to start. And I think it really goes across all levels. many times that we do a kind of a top-down approach, as the administrators, the deans, et cetera, we presume we know what those that are at the most junior levels, what they need to succeed and what things they need to really be taught or brought into the conversation to elevate them. I think that this has to happen across all levels and all domains, and really needs to be ingrained, like I said, within the essence of the institution. Right now, although I know some schools are working on this, I think Duke is one. I just heard this at a talk that I gave with the AAMC, have not built in, for example, issues related to effort you put in for D&I work into promotions of the academic ladder. When that gets built into the fabric, like I said, of the institution, it's required to do it, much like it's required for us to publish, it's required for us to give talks, it's required for us to do these scholarly pieces of work. Until that becomes part of the narrative, I don't think that we'll see sustainable change. I think we're in a particular time in our history where I call it the collision of three pandemics, what I just said in my recent TED Talk, which is we have this collision of COVID-19, obesity, which we didn't talk about, which is my topic, and racism. And right now, while most of us are still in a relative distant role, we're looking at this play out on our evening news time and time again. And so institutions in academia have decided, we need to address this. We need to do a white coats for Black lives. We need to show an outward demonstration of doing a lovely picture where everyone's kneeling in their white coats. The problem with us as Black physicians is like, those things are great and they look great on the outside, but what does that mean to us that are actually on the ground, that are living this existence within the academic setting? Talk to us, tell us if what you think as your plan actually is meaningful, actually causes things to be easier. If that's not happening, Dr. Catano, I think that even the institutions that have begun to do this work need to go back to the drawing board. So hopefully that was helpful in terms of, how I think about the work.
I have a question for you.
Dr. Watts, yes.
Given we've had some similarities, which I didn't even realize, like Medical College of Georgia, but nonetheless in the grants and all of that, how is it that you maintain a positive outlook and not building weight on the chip of your shoulder with everything that's gone on and pressing forward to continue to be successful? Do you have any tips and strategies? I think a lot of us may face that regardless if we may have racial differences, but with gender and other intersectionality, overlap.
So Dr. Watts, I think that's an excellent question. I didn't know we had those similarities either. So thanks for elucidating that for me. I think the key thing is that you could stop, right? Like you could just be like, you know what, I'm just going to give up. There were so many points along the way that I could just stop. But does that really help anyone that's coming behind me? I see myself put in this role to help those, usher those in. I kind of see myself as the Harriet Tubman, right? I'm trying to bring people along. If I stop, then those people don't get ushered in. Those people don't make it. Those people don't become the associate professors at Duke like yourself, or, we could just stop. I don't think it's time for us to stop. I mean, if I get an indication it's time to stop, then it's time to stop. And what we do know, unfortunately, for a lot of Black women particularly, and we've seen this play out in social media quite a bit with your Dr. Uche Blackstock, et cetera, talking about why they chose to leave academics. It's because they were facing the things that I talked about every day. And is it really worth it? When do you get to that point when you're like, enough is enough? I haven't yet gotten there. If I do, I'll let you guys know. But until then, I'm going to keep pushing. And those barriers, those walls that people put up for me are just a note to myself that I need to leap even higher. And that's really kind of how I've governed myself and governed my work. And I really, like I said, have my parents, my maternal grandmother, to thank for giving me that tenacity, that drive that tells me to keep going no matter what.
We have a question from the group, and one of the questions is, how do you respond and educate society members who are against DEI initiatives? And how do you start educating largely about inherent structural racism and unconscious or sadly conscious bias in that setting?
That's a really great question, Dr. Watts, and I'm not sure who asked that, but I want to thank you for that question. I think it's really by doing what I've done today, which I could have given you a lot of stats, I have lots of presentations where I give stats, and I have some work that's coming out that will give some great statistics. But what I learned at the Kennedy School when I was trying to convince my colleagues that were coming from so many different walks of life, Navy SEALs, teachers, architects, et cetera, that what I was saying was important was I recognized that we have to use that humanistic, that emotion side to really get across how challenging this is. So when I gave this talk, I gave mostly pictures of me throughout my life and explained what I was going through at the time. I mean, I had to limit it based upon our time. Sometimes those things are enough to bring those people that are, so I think of it as a bell-shaped curve. I'm not going to be able to get to those people that are completely adamantly against anything D&I. The Klan members probably are in that category, and you can imagine how I feel about them as having such an early exposure to them as a 3-year-old. We want to get to those people in the middle of that Gaussian shaped curve, those ones that are, I think this might be interesting. I'm not really sure. I don't know if I want to jump into that side of the water. I want to convert those people. I want to move those people, because if I can move more of those people, right, that shift of that curve for those of us who know statistics, well, kind of moves in such that we skew it a bit to the other side, where we have more people willing to engage in this work. So I think it's about using some of that human emotion, that humanistic piece of people that they presume didn't have challenges. People often think that about me until I give a talk that tells them otherwise. And then they begin to recognize, wow, this is real. This is real for those that we hold in high regard. And it's that shift that can usually tip those people that are in that kind of middle range over into the converted, the willing to do this work. We're always going to have that group that has no desire to engage in this work. I cannot convert them. They are obstinate. I need to work for the middle ground.
One thing I actually would like to address, Dr. Stanford, is systemic change is extremely important. And also to, as you said earlier, is to do from top down, really implement changes from the administrators down to the department chairs. But I think there also has to be some kind of a training, I guess, for the lack of a better word, but some kind of a training for the individuals being subjected to racism and microaggressions, because, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but Dr. Stanford, your response to racism was to do more, right? Do twice, 3, 4 times more than others to really prove yourself. And myself being from a multicultural background, is that I've seen that happen, and it can be exhausting. So what do you?
It's exhausting, Dr. Catano. It's exhausting.
Yeah,
my parents were like, "What are you doing today?" I was like, "I'm giving 4 talks." They're like, "What?" So my parents are adorable, by the way. Yeah.
So what do you tell those underrepresented minorities who are subjected to this type of discrimination? Other ways to cope or other ways to respond, not just to do 2, 3 times more, and not everyone's as talented as you are and be able to manage all that. I mean, some people will burn out. So how do you tell those people how to respond to those acts of racism without burning out?
Well, first, I tell them, to seek someone out. And so when I talk to my mentees, and I mentor quite a few, not just here at Harvard, but around the country, that just seek me out, that have heard, hey, this is the person you talk to. I tell them, first of all, don't try to be like me. My goal is to figure out where you feel comfortable. Like if you don't feel comfortable in speaking out against, micro or macro aggressions that you experience, then that's not your work. Maybe it's in, journaling. Maybe it's in finding other people that have experienced similar issues. But it's not just about being like with like, let's say, for example, Black students with Black students. It's about creating allies in the community that don't look like me. If we think about slavery, which I think about, unfortunately, a lot, we think about the progress during the Underground Railroad. We think about Harriet Tubman's work through that work. She had allies. She had Quakers. She had people that did not look like her that helped her navigate that space. And so we need to bring more people into this work to recognize that often our individuals like that are from racial and ethnic minorities have had so many more challenges to navigate to just being right where they are. I oversee a lot of the diversity and equity initiatives for NIDDK, for NIH. And one of the key things that I have brought up is that they don't see the challenges that happened before that, T or K or R grant went in. And so often the scrutiny that's being held doesn't take into account these unfortunate circumstances. I need to change the minds of those that are making the decisions, because right now, for example, NIH has begun to recognize, hey, we're not funding Black investigators. They have whole sites on the NIH that dedicate to the fact that they don't do a good job, and actually had an open call just on April 9th where anyone from any discipline through all the institutions could submit letters about what the NIH could do better, because they're seeking to do better. I'm happy to see this open call, but will they listen to what we wrote in these letters? I was one of those people who submitted letters. Will they actually do it, not just for a finite period of time, not while it's a sexy or in vogue thing to do, to look at DEI issues or JEDI issues, right? Justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. I hear that a lot. Let's not make that a finite period of time. Let's not let this end in 2021 after we finally get a guilty plea for someone like Chauvin. This has to be extended. This has to be extended so that we can support these people that are vulnerable, that are in a system where they don't have significant support, that are afraid to tell you these things because then they appear weak. We have to create a system that allows them to feel supported and not feel the need to have to do 10 times more. That's unfortunately the need that I felt that I've had to do to prove that I belong. And I don't want that for those people coming behind, but we need all of us as part of that cradle to help lift them up.
Thank you. And there was, along the same line, there was a really great question from one of the attendees. It says, can we discuss how white junior faculty who sometimes already feel unempowered personally support our colleagues who are likely feeling even less empowered secondary to intersectional identities?
Yeah, that's a really great question, especially for junior colleagues. Like, you feel like, wait a minute, I'm already going through a lot, and you have no idea that, oh, wait a minute, she's going through a lot more. I think that we just have to have these frank, open conversations like you are doing today, to hear what I'm saying, to have other people that are at the junior level to be able to speak freely and openly without repercussion for their progress in academia, if they're in academia. And if they're not in academia, still within the surgical environment, for example. We know that it's significantly, there are a lot of burdens that are placed. I mean, for women, and then you can imagine, like I said, for women with this intersectional identities, that the bar rises even higher. So we have to be willing to support each other, have these open conversations, feel that there's no repercussions, as I mentioned, and feel like, hey, if we band together as juniors, we can bring each other along if we help each other out.
There's a question that I thought was interesting from the audience about, it's great if we're in institutions that have very supportive and active DEI efforts, but what about those of us who are in institutions where this is more a passive effort or on the back burner? How can we advocate maybe for moving that higher on the agenda?
Yeah, I think that, Dr. Watts, thank you so much for that question. I think that in those situations where, you have the more passive, stance, you're going to have to meet those people that are very senior, right? Your Dr. Pori's, yourself, your Dr. Hans, to really begin to elevate this. And it doesn't need to be just women. We can have white men, for example, doing this work. Often many of those people have been people that have helped me along the way because they have that privilege. I'm also training my white male mentees in that way. I have one gentleman who is really kind of a warm person, who I could tell how much he's doing as he makes his way into residency in the next month or so, how much he's doing to bring Black women, for example, along the way. And the reason I knew this was because another Black female mentee who's much junior to him, I brought his name up to her, I'm sorry. And she made the comment, which I wasn't expecting, isn't he just adorable? Now, for a Black woman, first-year med student, to think that about a white male colleague here at Harvard, who is a Rhodes Scholar, who has done all of these things, it says something about his character. It says something about who he is. And so why not groom those people that we see significant promise with? And I've said to him, I said, you know what? You are going to have certain privileges as a white male that others won't have. I've been one of your primary mentors. I want you to remember this, but I want you to remember those people and the challenges they're going to face, because you've heard about my challenges. If we groom them now, we can begin to change the narrative, even in these settings where there's been significant resistance, because when those white men speak, we know that people listen, whether or not we agree with it or not. So let's groom them up. And for those that are senior in those environments already, that there's been more of a passive effort, make your voice be heard.
Thank you. There's actually a really great question, and I think it's similar to what I asked a little bit earlier. Is this attendee asked, how do you deal with your anger about this, especially when you were junior faculty, and this could be destructive to someone? Did you find ways to channel this constructively?
Oh, yes, I think constructively, yes. So I'm kind of like, okay, when you tell me no, I'm going to prove you wrong like 10 times over. So you're like, oh, you can't do that. I'm like, really? Did you just say that? I kind of see that as fighting words. And then I just go and do it, literally 10 additional things. And then you're like, oh, well, gosh, she did that, but she did 10 more things. And I'm not doing it to prove anything to them, but I'm doing it to prove that, like, don't put limitations on who I am. So I think that's a positive way of channeling it, just going to do more in a constructive way, right? Like last year in 2020, I published 39 peer-reviewed articles. People are like, how did you do that? Basically, I was like, I don't know really, but I just continue to push forward. I'm also, I told you, fitness is a huge part of me. You saw that in my presentation. Kickboxing is a lovely way to get out aggression without hurting anyone. So I am a very, very avid kickboxer. Back from the Taibo era, if you guys remember that, when it was still on VHS up until, now into more aggressive kickboxing, I'm able to get out a lot of aggression. So a lot of people have been beat up and they just don't know it. They really have no idea, but they have been pulverized.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stanford. You're an incredible role model, and an inspiration to all of us. And I think you're so right that these personal narratives really teach us things in a way that slides with a lot of statistics and numbers just can't. And it kind of opens our eyes to what we maybe haven't seen as well as we should, and the things that we need to do to help. So I thank you for sharing those stories, because I'm sure they're painful to share. And I love the image that you put out there of you as a modern day Harriet Tubman, bringing people, through to the other side, to the side of freedom and opportunity, giving everyone that chance. And I think that's something we should all take away today, that's a responsibility that we should all take, to that sort of she for she that Dr. Hahn mentioned earlier. I think that's a great way to put it. But that people that come behind us, we really need to help them move forward. And it's a responsibility we have in medicine and surgery to do that.
One of the things is about metrics. And we talked earlier about transparency, but what are the metrics that you think we should be collecting so that this becomes visible to the world? Because it's incredibly painful and demeaning, and it undermines confidence in a huge way. So are there metrics that you think we'd be looking at to help the world understand some of these things?
Yes, yes, absolutely, Dr. Levy. I appreciate that question. Number one, I think that we should have it ingrained and required that every single faculty member, regardless of your level, regardless if you're an endowed full professor or not, is actively engaged in work in DE&I, and that is documented and is part of your annual evaluation, what you're doing, and that you're dinged if you're not doing that work. Number one. Number two, I think we should actually actively survey those of us that do have intersectional identities on what we're experiencing in a way that is non-identifiable, de-identified, so that we can see what you may not know. If you don't know, if they haven't expressed it publicly or privately in a session where maybe you're mentoring them, you don't know what their struggles that they faced have been. You don't know, hey, they had to change divisions, to go up for promotion. You don't know that even when I did go up or asked to go up for associate professor, one of the questions I received was, why do you want to get promoted? I don't know who doesn't want to get promoted in academia. That was a bizarre question, but one that I actually directly was asked. These things, however, aren't known. I get a chance, I have this platform by which I'm allowed to speak, we need to be actively seeing what's happening in our departments of surgery or throughout our entire institutions. What are those people experiencing in a way that they don't face any backlash for indicating that? When we do that kind of gathering of data, then we can decide in our own respective institutions where our focus should be, Dr. Levy, because I think it may be different in different places based upon what that information tells us. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think just having a spreadsheet that has date of hire and department, number of publications, I mean, whatever the metrics are for promotion, and then a time frame, so that it's really visible that for Dr. Stanford, who's got 130 pages of her CV, look at this time versus one of our colleagues who may have been advanced much faster.
Exactly.
So I
love
really
that.
think
I love
we
that,
need
Dr.
to-
Levy. The timeline, I think, is key and important.
Yeah.
When I see my senior colleagues, I told you there have been 6 Black women make it to full professor in all of the Harvard-based institutions between MGH and the Brigham and Mount Auburn and Beth Israel, for example, we keep going on. Most of those Black women made it to full professor in their early to mid 60s. What does that say for me as someone in my 40s? What does that say to me that I need to then, I have like 800 publications by the time I finally get considered? That's what it sounds, that's the messaging I receive. And is that fair? Is that equitable? So I think you have a very good, that's a really great thing to add.
Well, thanks again, everyone, and special thank you to Dr. Catano and Dr. Watts and Dr. Levy for helping with the discussion. Thanks again for Dr. Stanford. We hope to see you again soon. We have a fabulous session now from Dr. Sutton, Dr. Beth Sutton. And Dr. Beth Sutton is a private practice surgeon who is a fellow of the American College of Surgeons. She's currently an American College of Surgeons regent, and she's the immediate past chair of the Board of Regents, one of the few women who has reached that position. Dr. Sutton has extensive leadership experience serving on numerous hospital committees and boards, as well as past president of her medical staff. Dr. Sutton's leadership experience with the American College of Surgeons includes serving as the president of the North Texas ACS chapter, a member of the Board of Governors Executive Committee, many ACS committees, and as faculty for the Surgeons' Leaders course. Most of all, Dr. Sutton is a wonderful, warm, and supportive individual, someone that has given me personal advice over the years, and we're just thrilled and honored to have her with us today to present on the topic of ACS leadership opportunities. Welcome, Dr. Sutton.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I'm Beth Sutton. I'm a surgeon in private practice in Wichita Falls, and that's a city of about 100,000, about halfway between Oklahoma City and Dallas, Texas. So our nearest really large academic medical center is 2 hours away, commonly the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. So my path to leadership in the college really was quite a bit different than what is commonly seen in the college. Years ago, academic medical centers would commonly pay for the travel and the lodging of a faculty member who was invited to give a paper at a program or a conference. And also the sort of nurturing of individuals within academic institutions tends to facilitate their ability to advance through the hierarchy of the college and other organizations. In my situation, I was not really anticipating ever becoming a leader in the college. When I started in private practice, I actually knew very little about the college, except that it was the next thing that everybody tried to become a member of after they passed their boards. I really didn't know what opportunities were there. And I really didn't even aspire to becoming, having any kind of leadership activity in the college, because in my mind, being a fellow was the end result. So when I started in practice, I initially was a member of a call group. In those days, people usually took call for their own practice unless they were out of town. And so we had a call group of 5 people. I was fortunate to be asked to join that when I came to town. And of course, the other members were all men, highly respected people. When I had been here about 2 weeks, one of the members of our call group called and said, Rosie and I, that was his wife, are going to take a trip to Italy. And I wondered if you would watch my practice while we're gone. And I said, well, of course, Dr. Wilson, I'd be happy to. What I didn't realize was that until a few days later was the great gift that he had given me with that, because all the nurses admired Dr. Wilson. The primary care physicians thought he walked on water. He had a huge practice. And so they all thought, well, if this young doctor who looks young enough to be my granddaughter is watching Dr. Wilson's practice, maybe she's okay. And it really helped my practice get started. I had been in practice probably a year or two when one of my colleagues, also a member of that call group, ran to me in the hallway and said, Beth, there's this wonderful thing. The college is starting an oncology group, and communities like ours are going to be able to participate and enroll patients. He was someone who already knew the benefits of the college, and he would go occasionally to the chapter meeting in Dallas, which was a long way away for us, but he would present a paper occasionally. And so he piqued my interest some. When I became a fellow, the year that I was initiated, he would smile, and with a twinkle in his eye, he would say, this is before I went to convocation. He would say, this is when a girl becomes a fellow, and grin. And when I was to be initiated, he and his wife invited me and my husband at the time, I was recently married at the time, invited us to go out to dinner with them and participate in some of the college activities. And so I realized a little bit more about how special the college's clinical congress and those activities were. About 4 years later, I was in my office one day and Dr. Wilson called and said, have you been out of medical school for 9 years? And I said, yes. And he said, well, I want to invite you to come as my guest to Texas Surgical Society. As many of you know, the college has multiple chapters in certain states. Texas has 2 chapters, but the Texas Surgical Society was a organization that had been around about as long as the college, to which people were invited to participate. And it included people from both the north and the south of Texas. So if you were a member of Texas Surgical Society, you could become acquainted with surgeons in private practice, surgeons in academic practice, and people from all over the state. So that membership led to me meeting a number of senior surgeons throughout the state. One of them was a close friend of Dr. Wilson, And a couple of years later, he called me and said, I wonder if you'd like to participate on the council of the North Texas chapter. I had not been to a chapter meeting, really wasn't aware of the importance of the chapters. I had had no further contact with the college except to go to the clinical congress, but I accepted his kind invitation and went to the chapter meeting and became later a counselor and eventually an officer, and learned the importance of getting to know people through the chapter and of the connection that the chapter had with the national organization. So the message of this story is that the path to my being in leadership in the college was not of my own making. It was not because I had any idea that that was even something I wanted to do. It was because someone who cared about me and saw potential in me reached out to me and made an effort that he didn't need to make. So as I start this sort of practical and somewhat, it will be a little bit disorganized presentation, the overarching message that I want to send is, number one, advocate for yourself. Number two, look around you for other people who have potential, who you can help get into a position where they can be active and get involved with not only the college, but other organizations of which you're a member. So after I was an officer in the chapter, I proceeded along a somewhat traditional pathway to leadership in the college. The traditional pathway is to be involved in the chapters, become an officer, eventually become a governor, which is sort of like the House of Representatives. And then the governors may be advanced by nomination to other leadership positions. Commonly, the Board of Regents is selected from other college leaders. And in my case, I was very fortunate that a friend nominated me to be a regent, initially without my knowledge, but I was very, very fortunate to be chosen. I was a diversity, not so much because I was a female, but because of being in private practice. And the percentage of private practice surgeons who are actually in independent practice has decreased in proportion over the last number of years, because it is a diminishing way to practice, a diminishing practice pattern. But there are many other ways to become a leader in the college. One thing that was helpful to me was, as I told you, my friend and colleague who was so excited about the American College of Surgeons Oncology Group, we did get a community cancer program, and eventually I was the cancer liaison physician. So I was able to go to the Commission on Cancer meetings. These sorts of opportunities are available through trauma, through quality, through the regional surgical societies, and through the Young Fellows Association, the Resident and Associate Society, and programs for medical students. So I'd like to just kind of walk you through a little bit since we're not in person, we can't hand each other a note with our phone number. I think Jenny and the ACS staff will probably take care of making sure that you have contact information for us. I certainly invite you to contact me at any time if I can be helpful. I may not know the answer, but I'll find somebody who does. The college website is a challenge to navigate. It is not very standardized, and it tends to not be very, to my mind, intuitive. I am admittedly pretty severely challenged where it comes to electronic and digital formats. But I think the college website really does have a tremendous amount of information. And so I think the best way to approach that as a resource for finding ways to get involved in the college is probably, I'm going to give you a little overview that's very basic. But then when you have some time, probably on more than one occasion, get a cup of coffee and sit down with the website. You can Google American College of Surgeons or go to facs.org and then just navigate around the website. Don't be alarmed that there are parts of it that don't seem to make any sense. Don't let yourself be too discouraged by the fact that the different pillars of the college, their parts of the website don't look the same. So things aren't organized the same way for education that they are for member services or advocacy. But if you spend some time with the website and really look around it with a big legal pad in front of you to jot down notes, it will tend to give you some great ideas about things that you may want to explore further. So the website is, as I said, not intuitive, but when you look at it initially, you're going to see a big blue banner that goes across the top. And above that, there's a gray bar. And the gray bar has two things that are very, very helpful. The first is events, and the second is find a surgeon. And I'll come back to that later. Then the blue bar is the one that has, at the extreme far right, it'll say about the college. And then as you move to the left, there'll be sections for publications, advocacy, education, quality, and member services. And all of those sections have some very helpful ways of finding activities that may be enticing to you. There are a few principles as to how to look at those. The first is that if you go to the section on about the college and then click on governance, it's going to tell you some very important things, including there's a copy of the bylaws there. And if you're interested, whether you're a fellow, senior fellow, young surgeon, if you're interested in how to actually move through the college, reading the bylaws is worth its weight in gold. Bylaws are kind of dull generally. You have to really concentrate because there's useful information in multiple areas. But if you can read through them, they really help you know how the nominating committees work and how the hierarchy of the college works. And someone who has been in leadership at the college can help interpret those for you. As you look at that blue bar, if you start with member services, there will be sections for medical students, residents, YFA, fellows, etc. Now, before I continue with that, I'll say that it's easier to participate in the college if you're a member at some level. You can be a medical student member for $20. A residency membership is about $25. And many of the educational programs, both general surgery and some of the surgical specialty programs, will pay for their residents to be a member. And so if you're a resident, you don't know whether your program pays for that, the staff member, the administrator for the residency can help with that. But on each of those blue bar sections, if you click on, for example, education, and you read down that long list and you see something that's interesting, and you click around and you find a committee or some type of board or commission or some kind of organization or subset there, click on it, and there may be a bar that says, quote, view the roster. If you view the roster, that will give you the names of the people who are on that committee. And then if you need to contact them, you can get their contact information either from a staffer, or sometimes it'll be there on the roster. The other pearl for looking through the website is that for most of the committees and the main activities of the college and a lot of the events, there'll be a place where it says staff, and there'll often be a link that will be the person's first name first initial, last name at facs.org. And that's the staff member that's associated with that initiative. If you click on that, it will usually send an email to that staff member. So this is really helpful, because if that staff member doesn't know the answer to your question, he or she is probably going to know how to go about getting that information. A few brief specifics. For medical students and residents, particularly medical students, if you're interested in the college and you're really not sure who in your area is a fellow, if you go back to the gray bar and go to find a surgeon and put in there, it'll come up with a box. You can put in the name of either a surgeon that you know and find out if they're a fellow, or you can put in your town. If you're not in an academic medical center and you're in practice, you can put in the town you're in, and it'll show you the names of the surgeons in your town who are fellows of the college. For residents, there's a special, the Resident and Associate Society has all kinds of activities. There's also a Residents as Teachers and Leaders program. The Young Fellows Association, all these are listed under member services. The Young Fellows Association has a speakers bureau and a mentor program. There's also a separate program for residents as teachers and leaders, and I think that's listed under education. The Surgeons as Leaders and Surgeons as Educators programs are listed either under Member Services or under Education, or sometimes under both. For senior fellows, there's a committee on professional opportunities for senior surgeons, and we're starting a mentoring program for mid-career surgeons as well. For our Canadian surgeons, as you know, probably, the American College of Surgeons was started by surgeons from Canada and the United States. And our Canadian fellows, of course, have their own college, the Royal College of Surgeons of Canada. So we have had challenges in attracting enough Canadian surgeons to be fellows of the college. The best way to find Canadian fellows who can help with you getting involved is to look under regions, which is under governance. Under governance, it will have the names of the officers and the regents, and you'll be, although it doesn't tell you which regents are filling the positions of Canadian regents, of which there are always 2, no fewer than 2, you'll be able to tell from Dr. Grondin and Dr. Chagnon's addresses that they're from Canada. And either they or I can put you in touch with Canadian regents who have rotated off the Board of Regents who can help you get involved if you're interested. For our specialty surgeons, and I'm going to end pretty quickly after this, for our specialty surgeons, when I was chair of the Board of Regents last year, and now under Dr. Scott Levin, who's the current chair of the Board of Regents, one of our initiatives has been to increase the engagement and the welcome to our surgical specialties. And a good way to look for our specialty regents is to go to that same section and look for the regents who are orthopedic surgeons or cardiothoracic surgeons. But you can also look under member services under advisory councils. And there's an advisory council for each specialty, and there are rosters for those so that you can actually find a person to contact. So in all cases, as you go through the website, look for the rosters and look for the staffers. And again, you'll have the resources of the people who are presenting on this seminar today. As I was going through the website, I initially had the idea that I was going to make a list of all the committees in the college, and then I realized that that was essentially impossible given the format of the website. But I did come across a wonderful oral history presentation by LaSalle Lafall, who was president of the American College of Surgeons, actually the first African-American to be in that position. He talked about his experience and about his father's advice to him, which was a good education and hard work coupled with integrity will take you where you want to go. And that's absolutely true in the college. If you volunteer, you look for things that you're interested in, and you have the interests of your fellow surgeons and your patients in mind, you will definitely proceed through the hierarchy. And it doesn't have to be a standard pyramidal type thing. You can just meet people, get to know people, like the people, and have a positive attitude. And it should be I hope it will be as enjoyable to you and as fulfilling as it has been for me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sutton. That was very inspiring. And I really think the messages that resonate with me is the importance of networking, the importance of sponsorship, and how we all have a responsibility, not only to our own career, but to bring other people behind us, just as your mentors did when they, suggested you for these leadership roles. And so that's something we can all take to heart. We want to continue our conversation for a little bit longer with our Q&A session. And we have Dr. Christina Cellini and Dr. Nassim Hediati to join Dr. Sutton for this session. Dr. Cellini is an assistant professor of surgery at the University of Rochester. She's a member of the American College of Surgeons and the American Society of Colorectal Surgeons. She's a member of the ACS Women in Surgery Committee, where she serves on the program subcommittee and also as vice chair of the Personal Empowerment Subcommittee. In addition, Dr. Cellini has been the chair for the ACS Committee on Applicants for Upstate New York District Number 2 since 2017. And Dr. Hediati is a professor of surgery at the University of California, Davis. She's medical director of the UC Davis Vein Center and chief of vascular surgery at Sacramento Veterans Affairs Medical Center. She's actively involved with resident education and training. Dr. Hediati is a fellow of the American College of Surgeons and a member of the Women in Surgery Committee. She serves on several committees of the American Venous Forum, the Society for Vascular Surgery, and the American College of Surgeons, and she's the chair of our program subcommittee. So welcome, Dr. Cellini and Dr. Hediati, and I look forward to the conversation.
I was going to comment on Dr. Sutton's view of the website. I totally agree with it. And it came to mind that one way to bypass that a little bit is when you are a fellow, you get a lot of emails from the ACS, from the college. And it's tempting when your inbox is overflowing and you want to clean things up to click delete and just delete all of them. But at times when things slow down with my cup of coffee, I sit down and actually read the emails. And that is actually how I found myself on this committee, in the Women in Surgery Committee, as there was a call for it out, and I looked through it and I said, oh, that might be interesting, and I think that might be a good fit for me, as well as the Committee on Applicants. That was another committee that just kind of came by through a call in one of those emails. And it's also a great way to get a sense of what's going on, what topics are of interest to you that you can get involved with. So I always tell the applicants when we're interviewing them for fellowship, don't delete the emails. Keep a few of them and save them for a rainy day, and just look through them and see what's out there and see what's a good fit for you.
Absolutely, I agree with that. I think I found out about this committee, I think when the mentorship thing was sent out several years ago, when I applied to be a mentee and was assigned a mentor through this committee, which I found amazing. And then I saw the call for the committee and I applied and became part of the committee, which I think is key. And I think another way that I think a lot of times we can get more involved with the ACS is that a lot of the other societies, surgical societies that we're on, a lot of times we'll have representatives representing those societies on behalf of them to the ACS. So that's another way that you can become involved. And that's how you get on additional committees, because then when you apply to those committees, you say, I'm on this committee and that committee, and they kind of like to see that you're involved already with multiple committees and you bring that experience from having served on committees from other societies to the ACS. And I think that's how we get more involved, is just bringing that new experience and, doing that early on in our careers when we were residents and fellows, and then early career and moving on with it.
I wanted to also echo what Dr. Sutton said about the local chapters. When we're interviewing the candidates for fellowship, I always talk about what I feel like were my missed opportunities. So, like there's the resident and associate fellow society, and which you can join, I think, as a resident. I don't know if you can join as a med student, but as a member, you can definitely get involved in your local chapter. There's many opportunities for people to get involved. And as a young surgeon, when you're starting out, it tends, things are busy, you're worried about your practice. But if you can find a way to do something, get on a committee and something you're interested in, it will definitely help further along. I feel like I didn't do enough of that, or I got distracted by other things early on. So I like to tell the candidates that that's something they should definitely look into and get involved more in their local chapter as well. The local chapters can be varied, I think, from state to state. I'm in New York, so New York is, I don't know if people realize this because most people think New York City, but New York is huge. And our local chapter actually extends all the way from Western New York, where I'm in Rochester, to down to Long Island, New York City area. So it's a big geographical area. So when things were all in person, it can get a little hard to go to a meeting or to a talk or dinner or whatever it might be. Especially if it's 2 or 3 hour drive away. To becoming more involved in how this new format has definitely made it easier. So I'm hoping that part of that might stay once the bulk of this epidemic is over, and that some of these local meetings, et cetera, in the bigger states can stay at least partially virtual.
I think the other thing about committees is it's important to remember is, join committees that are of interest to you, not just because it's something you think you need to add or put on for your resume for promotion. Being on like something like a guidelines committee or something that there's committees for patient education where you work on pamphlets for patient education for, let's say, oncology, or I'm on a couple of committees where we're putting out information about vascular disease, things that are of interest to you. And I think, because again, I think multiple people have already brought this up, that this is volunteer time. This is time you're not going to get, there's no RVUs for your volunteer for, the time you spend on committees. This is time you're taking out of your day to spend on multiple committees, on Zoom calls and stuff. So it's got to be something that you do enjoy. But it's also a great networking opportunity because you do meet a lot of other people that can, again, become mentors or sponsors and introduce you to other people or get you on other committees. I've certainly met really wonderful people on this committee. That's been great, and I've really enjoyed being part of this. And these 3 years, when it comes to an end and Dr. Porres kicks me off this committee, will be a really sad day for me. So.
Agree. And a lot of people will come up to us and say, how do I want to be involved? How do I get involved? And we give them the opportunities. But, also showing up and doing the work as well will get you recognized. And that's how I became the chair of the Committee on Applicants. I was a member. I actually was one of the handful of people that every year would actually show up to the interviews and stay for the whole time while we interviewed, sometimes up to 10 different people in a day. And one day, I guess as they were rolling through and some people were rolling off, I got an email asking if I wanted to be the chair. And basically it was because the previous chair had recognized that I had been there and had participated, and that's where I got that opportunity. So definitely pick something that's interesting to you, because like Dr. Hedayati said, you have limited free time. So you want to make the most of that time. So pick a committee that you think might be helpful in terms of networking and the things you want to do, research you want to do, and then go from there. Even in the interviews we did yesterday for the applicants, there was one of the trauma surgeons from Syracuse was on the committee, and there was an applicant who was doing a lot with education and trauma and videotaping for feedback, and it looks like they're going to have a very out some new things within the trauma world throughout the state. So just in that brief moment, there was that opportunity to collaborate.
Well, thank you everyone for a fabulous discussion. Thank you, Dr. Salini and Dr. Hedayati. Thank you, Dr. Sutton. And to close out our session today, we were going to have Dr. Barbara Levy give some final remarks and reflection on this session, and also just things that we can think about going forward. Dr. Barbara Levy is a lifelong advocate for advancing the quality of women's health. She was in private practice and comprehensive holistic women's health for over 30 years and served as a medical director for women's and children's services for the Franciscan Health System in Washington State. She was the first female president of the AAGL in 1994, and she's currently a voluntary clinical professor of obstetrics, gynecology, and reproductive sciences at University of California, San Diego. She has experience as the chair of the AMA resource-based RVU Scale Committee. She's a reviewer and editor for several journals, and she was the first full-time woman physician leader serving as the VP of Health Policy for the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. She's a fellow of the American College of Surgeons and has been a spectacular vice chair of the Women in Surgery Committee. Thank you, Dr. Levy, for all of your work over the years and for your help with this seminar today, and we're looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Porres. I think there are some themes that we've been listening to, and Dr. Sutton's talk really highlighted for me the incredible importance of the mentors and sponsors. If someone hadn't invited you to a meeting that you didn't know anything about, to an organization that you didn't know anything about, you may not have ended up as the chair of the Board of Regents. So I think that one of the lessons that my dad taught me was that when somebody opens a door, you have to walk through it. And as women surgeons, we're busy, we're tired, we've got a lot of things pulling at us all of the time. And I remember a very specific story that when a sponsor called me one Sunday morning to participate in the AMA RVS Update Committee, the RUC, for those of you who don't know it, because in academic medicine it's a little bit less important. But the AMA's committee actually adjudicates the work RVUs for all of our codes. And I looked at the opportunity to do more travel and be away from home and my 2 children and my husband and my private practice and all the other things that I was doing. And I say, how can I do one more thing? And then my father's voice was in my head saying, somebody opens a door, you walk through it. And that was, 1997. I was the only woman around the table at the RVS Update Committee. The chair for several years thought I was staff for the American College of OBGYN because there were not other women, despite the fact that I was sitting at the table and voting. But, in the end, I became the chair of that committee and chaired it for 6 years. So it really is about walking through doors when people open them. Some of it is total serendipity. It is being in the right place at the right time and having someone who opens that door for you. And you never really know when that will take place. But the networking is helpful. We have to be grateful to those white men, in my case, who was a sponsor and supported me in that role. I also think that there are going to be barriers. It's devastating to hear Dr. Stanford talk about her 130-page CV and the fact that she hasn't been promoted through all of these years. And so even institutions that are talking the talk about gender and racial diversity and inclusion, they're more focused on diversity than inclusion, I think. And I think holding them to metrics, for us to insist on transparency, insist that there's salary transparency and that we keep the spreadsheets that highlight those issues are going to be critical going forward. And we as women leaders, I think, need to take the reins here. We need to take the reins for our colleagues, male and female, who are in underrepresented minorities, and ensure that doors are open for them and that we sponsor them. Similarly, I think we really have to support each other. You know, that the question earlier about women faculty who are not supportive of women trainees is hard to hear, but we know it's true. So I think we all have to be self-reflective, understanding that we get really stressed. We've got stressors at home, we're sandwich generation, there are all kinds of reasons why we may not be as open, as supportive, but I think one of our challenges is to commit ourselves to self-reflection, to looking at our own interactions with trainees, with our fellow surgeons, with nurses, with other team members, and ensure that we are meeting our own standards for what we think is the best possible behavior. So there are lots of challenges for us. I think it's an exciting time that at least people are talking, even if we're not yet walking the walk. And I think that it just takes time. And many of us are tired of the amount of time that it's taken. That said, I think Dr. Stanford was incredibly inspiring, that despite all of the barriers and all of the things that she has faced, she just has a huge smile on her face and she keeps going forward. And unfortunately, for all of us, we still face the stigma of the angry Black woman or the angry woman surgeon. That when we fight these battles, if we do it with anything other than a smile on our face and a positive attitude, we are stigmatized and we are put off in the corner. So I'm hoping that one of our other sessions at some point will be able to go through some very specific skill building about how you walk that fine line that we've talked about today. Dr. Hahn talked about it as well. Navigating that pathway. You know, when you become a woman of color and the first chair of a department of surgery is a woman of color, are you being put in a situation where you're going to fall off that glass cliff? Are you being put in a situation where you're set up to fail because the rest of the structure in the institution doesn't exist to help to support you? Those are all questions that we have to ask ourselves as we are looking at opportunities. One of the things I recommend to my mentees is that when you take a leadership role, insist that the institution pay for coaching. We can all use a coach to help us with self-reflection, to help us understand the landscape of where we are, especially if you're going into a new place. So just some general thoughts. I thought the sessions were fantastic, inspiring, but also disturbing in that we're nowhere near where we need to be, and we have to help each other get there. So I am so grateful for the opportunity to have worked with the Women in Surgery Committee of the ACS. Frankly, I think the ACS is more supportive of women than the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. And it's a hard thing to say, but overall, I think that it's true. I think leadership in the college is far more supportive of diversity and inclusion and has made significant efforts to ensure that we are holding ourselves accountable. So without that accountability, these things don't really happen. And the accountability comes by measuring, by taking a look at your diversity, taking a look at how you choose people. Some of the structural gender and racial bias comes from the structure of how we do nominations and how we do voting. So all of those things are things for us to think through, but I am incredibly grateful to the College of Surgeons for the opportunity to do something like this. It's really tremendous. And I will tell you that 30 years ago, leadership would have said, well, we have a male leadership meeting. I mean, after all, men need to be leaders too. So it's lovely and encouraging that there's recognition that we do face challenges and that women of color, that intersectionality of being either a non-US born person or being a woman of color or being in an underrepresented minority of any kind can add to that problem. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the sessions as much as I did. I want to thank Drs. Hahn, Sanford, and Sutton for presenting, and our panelists, Drs. Kraft, Chang, Catano, and Watts, Cellini, and Hedayati for joining the discussion. It's a little bit challenging for all of us. Beth, you're not the only one who can to look at the chat, look at the Q&A, and be on screen at the same time. So I think everyone did a terrific job. And thank you, Dr. Porres, for moderating and keeping us all both on time, but just focused on things that are really important. Your leadership of this committee has been outstanding. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to work with you. So for those of you who are attending, if you're interested in further connecting with the Women in Surgery Committee, the last page in your attending packet contains additional details on the committee and our membership program. And I think Dr. Cellini mentioned that the mentorship program is one way to get involved, or maybe it was Dr. Hedayati who said that. But yes, that's one way for sure to get involved with the committee. Everyone have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend.
Thank you so much, Barbara, and thank you to all of our speakers, our discussants, the staff, and as I don't have too much to add, except I know Bradley's going to give us a few housekeeping details, but it's been a spectacular day.
As Dr. Levy pointed out, check out that last page of the attendee packet. We do have opportunities for people to get involved with the Women in Surgery Committee, and we'd be glad to have you. Thank you all for joining us today.